Ciao a tutti, ben ritrovati con Outcast Reportage, il podcast di Outcast.it nel quale vi raccontiamo fiere ed eventi dedicati ai videogiochi. Io sono Andrea Maderna e quello che state per ascoltare è il secondo episodio del reportage dedicato al Reboot Develop Blue 2019. Nel primo episodio vi ho raccontato la fiera, qui trovate raccolte le 6 interviste che ho condotto lì a Dubrovnik. Quindi, proseguendo nell'ascolto, potrete gustarvi le mie chiacchierate con Warren Spector, creatore di Deus Ex, di 100.000 altri giochi, si è chiacchierato di game design, della sua carriera, eccetera, con Cecil, cofondatore di Revolution Software e quindi creatore di Lure of the Temptress, Beneath the Steel Sky, della serie di Broken Sword, da poco annunciato Beyond the Steel Sky, e anche con lui insomma si è parlato di tanti argomenti. Rami Ismail, membro di Vlambeer, persona molto attiva nella scena dello sviluppo di videogiochi. Abbiamo parlato di tantissime cose, è la chiacchierata più lunga in assoluto, credo molto interessante. Hidetaka Suehiro, famoso soprattutto direi per Deadly Premonition, ma ha sviluppato anche tanti altri giochi, anche con lui un excursus un po' sulla sua carriera. Tetsuya Mizuguchi, con le sue risposte sognanti e filosofiche, stiamo parlando del creatore di Rez, Space Channel 5, Tetris Effect, Lumines, Segarelli, insomma anche qua un sacco di roba. E infine Anya che lavora per Kickstarter, si occupa di seguire chi fa i progetti di giochi, videogiochi, campagne di raccolte fondi. Abbiamo parlato un po' delle dinamiche di quella piattaforma. Tutte le interviste sono ovviamente in inglese, vi segnalo che quella a Suehiro è stata condotta tramite un interprete, quindi potrete ascoltare le mie domande e le risposte date in inglese dall'interprete. Se conoscete il giapponese e volete ascoltare la conversazione integrale, potete scaricare il file tramite il link che trovate nella descrizione dell'episodio e sul sito outcast.it. E vi segnalo anche che purtroppo l'audio dell'intervista ad Anya non è insomma di grandissima qualità, perché l'intervista è stata condotta in una zona un po' rumorosa, però insomma penso si riesca abbastanza ad ascoltare. Inoltre, se preferite leggere questi contenuti in italiano invece che ascoltarli in inglese, sappiate che l'intervista a Rami Ismail è stata pubblicata con una trascrizione quasi integrale su everyeye.it, mancano un paio di domande e risposte. L'intervista a Tetsuya Mizuguchi è stata pubblicata sotto forma di mix fra le risposte che mi ha dato e il racconto del suo talk al reboot, sempre su everyeye.it, la trovate lì. E secondo questa formula, quindi mix di intervista e racconto dell'intervento in fiera, trovate le altre 4 su IGN Italia. Troverete poi tutti i link nella descrizione dell'episodio per raggiungerle comodamente, e le trascrizioni integrali delle interviste appariranno invece nei prossimi giorni su Outcast.it. Chiaramente solo delle 5 che non sono già state trascritte integralmente altrove, quella Rami Ismail potete leggervela per intero su everyeye, tranne appunto, come ho detto, un paio di domande e risposte che metterò su Outcast.it. Direi che è tutto. Prima di salutarvi vi ricordo che questo tipo di podcast qua in particolare può esistere soprattutto grazie al vostro contributo, dato che sono potuto andare a seguire la fiera sfruttando il piccolo budget che riusciamo ad accumulare attraverso le donazioni. Quindi se potete e se volete, ricordatevi che facendo acquisti tramite i link convenzionati su Amazon Italia, Amazon UK, Tostadora, comprando le nostre magliette, usando il tag Outcast Live su Epic Game Store, facendo tutte queste cose ci arrivano piccole percentuali di quello che spendete senza sovrapprezzi per voi. Se volete invece farci donazioni dirette potete farlo tramite PayPal o tramite Patreon. I link per fare tutte queste cose li trovate su Outcast.it, dove trovate tutto il resto delle cose che facciamo. Direi che è tutto, ho parlato fin troppo, vi lascio alle interviste. From what I understand, reading about you, that I understand that you were first a movie buff.
Oh yeah.
And then a game developer and passionate. I mean, I read that you started as a movie critic, and then you went in board game. And in fact, when I saw your talks, you are always making sophisticated movie references as examples, and I connect to that.
Yeah, I try. I love movies still to this day. And I thought I was going to end up, well, originally I wanted to make movies. I wanted to be a director like everybody else. But in high school I was making movies, and in college I made movies. And I realized, even at that early stage, that there were people who were way more talented than I was at making movies. So I decided, I knew a lot about film history. Let's focus on that, and I'll be a history professor and writer. But on the side, when I was in graduate school, I was playing tabletop board games and role-playing games, and fell in love with games. Just absolutely fell in love with them. And the opportunity came along to get a job at Steve Jackson Games, a small board game and role-playing company, and I jumped at the chance.
And I guess you could see that in the games you worked on, you can see those influences, because there's the board game element, the pen and paper RPGs element in kind of all your games, in some way or another, and there's also the taste for narration and cinematic elements.
Well, I try to steer clear of cinematic elements. Okay. In fact, I mean, just on the surface level, one of my rules is no cinematics, no cutscenes.
Well, maybe I was thinking more of the fact that usually there's a strong narration, even if it's through the gameplay.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in strong narrative, and the interesting thing is people when they think about my games, typically they come back to player empowerment and player choice and choice and consequence, and all of that is there, and it is the most important thing. But if you look at all my games, they actually tell a completely linear story, because what I want to do, the way my games are structured, is there's a linear story where I control the narrative arc. I control what you're doing and why you're doing at every moment. But how you do it, the minute-to-minute gameplay, belongs entirely to the player. And that's kind of the dialogue between me and players, that they're playing my story the same way the players in a tabletop role-playing game would play the dungeon master's story. But because they're in control of the minute-to-minute, no two players end up actually having the same experience, and it's really powerful. I think if it was just the choice and consequence part, you'd have a sandbox and players might be entertained by it, but I think having that overarching narrative that I own makes the experience richer and deeper.
So I guess you could say that your games are like many separated sandboxes that interconnect through the story?
That's a great way to put it. In fact, I have talked about that. There are sandbox games and there are roller coaster games. One where there's no overt narrative at all, and one where it's completely linear, and the designer knows exactly what you're going to do every step of the way. And my games are little strings of sandboxes. That's exactly right.
Okay. And in fact, I mean, I replayed the first Deus Ex a few years ago, and if there's one thing that hasn't aged at all, in my opinion, is that the way that you can do kinda whatever you want inside the rules, even more than, I don't know, the recent Deus Ex and other similar games. But I'm fascinated by the fact that recently there has been like 3-4 years where suddenly there were 2 Deus Ex, the 2 Dishonored, Prey. It looked like it was all the rage, that kind of games. And then it kind of faded out, at least in AAA games. Of course, there is Underworld and System Shock 3, but it's less talked about.
I'm not sure I agree. I've certainly, I've done a lot of interviews.
Okay.
And the resurgence of immersive simulation games, which is what we call the genre, immersive simulation, it seems to be coming back now in the Dishonored games and the Deus Ex games. And the interesting thing is, I always thought that idea that you can actually play the game the way you want to was really powerful and mainstream. And now we're starting to see that actually come into games like Breath of the Wild, the latest Zelda game. I'm not saying there was any influence. I mean, those guys are geniuses, and they're way better game developers than I will ever be. But you can start to see some of that pick your play style play coming into that, and the games from ZeniMax, from Bethesda, certainly have some of that play the way you want to quality.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're seeing is maybe less dedicated games like that, but more games that were influenced by the immersive simulation genre. And so it's just it's kind of sneaking in. It's funny because that was one of the goals I had for Epic Mickey, was to take the ideas behind immersive simulation and reach a larger audience with it. Because I knew if I had Mickey Mouse as my hero, I was going to get people playing because it's Mickey Mouse as the hero, and it worked. I mean, Epic Mickey was the best-selling game I ever worked on by a long shot, but it had those same ideas about choose your own play style, and how you play actually makes a difference in how the story unfolds and all of that. So I think the resurgence is still happening. It's just maybe happening a little bit under the radar.
Okay. And I was thinking when we were talking about narration and choose your own games, a few years ago, I don't know if you like or you feel close to that game, but a few years ago I remember at the GDC Awards, Shadow of Mordor won for the best narrative, and I remember discussions, people saying, well, the story is not that good, but the point was that you made your story through gameplay, even if the overarching story wasn't that fascinating. Mm-hmm. The fun part was creating your rivals and creating stories with that. So I guess that's also in a way influenced by these ideas.
Yeah, I think that's, again, I don't want to say that they played Deus Ex or Epic Mickey and therefore they made the games. Although frankly, when Deus Ex came out, I did have several developers come and talk to me and say, when we played Deus Ex, we completely rethought the way we design games, which was really flattering, and that's one measure of success, having some influence on other developers. But I almost hate to say it, but it almost doesn't matter if the narrative is great. The narrative just has to provide context for gameplay. It has to provide significance for it. Your brother is being held prisoner, has been kidnapped, and you have to rescue him, is way more interesting than, put this white pixel on this brown pixel, press this button, and you get a red pixel. Which is basically what games are, by the way. But your brother is being kidnapped. Rescue him that's a story, So I think you're right. That Shadow of Mordor actually, even if the story wasn't great, and I'll leave that for other people to decide. I'm not going to get involved in that discussion. But even if it wasn't, it's players still creating their own fun. That's what games are all about.
Yeah, and you're saying about the developers telling you that they changed their ways. You kind of ruined Half-Life 2 for me. No. Because I first played Deus Ex, and then when I was playing Half-Life 2, which of course I loved, but there were moments where I was like, I spent an hour putting crates on top of crates because I wanted to jump over a fence, which is something I did on Deus Ex.
Sure.
And then there was an invisible wall.
Yeah.
So you ruined that part of games for me.
Well, I'm sorry I ruined Half-Life 2 for you. I loved Half-Life 2 as well. Valve, when they were making games, they were the masters of roller coaster games. I mean, you were completely on rails, basically. quickly, and they know every step you're going to take, and the big decision is, how do I kill that thing, you know? And because of that, they can create amazing emotional experiences. They know what you're doing at every moment. And so I think games like that, you know, games like Tomb Raider and Last of Us, and you know, games that really do know what you're doing at every step, they can be incredible emotional experiences. Whereas I think of my games as more intellectual exercises. You know, I want players thinking as much as I want them feeling. And so they're just different. You know, I don't think it's better or worse. I'm glad games like Half-Life 2 and Last of Us exist. You know,
or maybe all those games like Gone Home, or Everybody's Gone to the Rock, all that subgenre, which is very linear and very narration focused, and it's completely different from what you do.
Yeah, and I love those games.
Yeah, but even in that area, like especially in mobile games, I think there are some games that experiment with letting you choose your path through the stories with some random generation. That's also interesting. It's a very interesting pot.
Well, we're in a very interesting time right now where no one knows what the future holds, and no business model actually works. And if you're an indie developer and you have a great idea, you can reach an audience with it. So basically everything is happening. There's this incredible moment where it doesn't have to be a AAA game with a known IP and all of that. Anything is possible. So you've got this thriving indie scene where people are doing amazing things. I mean, people are going to hate me for saying this, but the best gaming experience I had recently was playing Florence on my iPad, you know, which is so unlike anything I would ever make, you know, although frankly I'm inspired by it. You know, everything is possible now, and that's really exciting.
And I mean, during your career you worked on so many, in various capacities, on so many great important games, seminal I guess we could say, and you also worked on Mickey Mouse. So then I saw you going to teach at the university, and I thought, okay, he's satisfied. But I guess you're not.
Well, you know, the thing that I find most exciting is that people I worked with, and even the people that I taught, are going off and doing, like they drank the Kool-Aid, you know. Guys like Harvey Smith and Ricardo Bear, and you know, many others that I've worked with are off now making their own games, and I hope making people forget I ever existed. That's the big success, right? It's seeing people adopt the ideas that you helped to create. I don't want to take too much credit, but you know, I certainly have been a strong supporter of a particular kind of game for the last 36 years, and it's exciting to see people carrying on the mission. You know, I still want to make a couple of games and show these young whippersnappers what it's all about, but I'm just excited to see that people are carrying on now.
And I've heard you talk quite a few times about the fact that people identify games just with you, but that's not fair.
It's crazy.
But it's also hard probably, because kind of like in movies, you have to identify, I don't know, the director, maybe a few actors, but you cannot know about hundreds of people who made them. So it's a balance act, I think.
Well, you know, I do think it's a shame that I get so much credit for so many games. I mean, without Doug Church, Underworld and System Shock wouldn't have happened. They just flat wouldn't have happened. It doesn't matter how much influence I had on those projects or how much I contributed to those projects. It wouldn't have mattered. Without Harvey Smith Smith and Chris Norton and others, Deus Ex wouldn't have happened. The game would not exist. I had the original idea. I had a vision. I closed my eyes in 1997 and said, "This is the game I want to make." I mean, and 3 years later, there it was. But those guys made it real. You know, I mean, I half jokingly say I haven't done real work in 25 years. Those guys, accepted the vision and carried it out. So I get too much credit. Now, frankly, when the games don't work, I get all of the blame. So it probably balances out. But, you got to credit the teams. You've got to credit the teams, and especially the leads. I work through my leads. Even now, I've got a 20-person team. But I have a core leadership group, a tech director, a design director, and an art director. And I work with them on a daily basis. I mean, constantly, beating them on, here's the vision, here's the game we're making, here's the game we're making. But in terms of people who type and who use a mouse to draw things, my role is to review and say, no, this is not what I want. But it's their job to actually manage the day-to-day and do that day-to-day creative stuff. That's not me. That's not my role. It never has been.
And on a similar topic, I guess, especially since you've been working, you work with, in many ways, Electronic Arts and Disney, and now you're an indie developer. You've kind of seen it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of talk lately, and for a few years, about too much crunch, about the possibility of unionizing, all this stuff. And there's always people who say, I look at it from the outside, so I really don't know what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of people who think that there's no way around this crunch culture, and that's how games are made. I guess, what do you think?
I wish we didn't have to crunch, and I used to be a part of death marches. On Ultima 7 Part 2, Serpent Isle, the worst named game in history, we crunched 6 and 7 days a week for almost a year. It was grueling. And on Epic Mickey and Thief, we did some pretty serious crunch. On Deus Ex, we did serious crunch. Now my attitude is, let's do targeted crunching. So before a milestone, before a trade show, I think it's important to make sure that you're achieving maximum quality. In those moments. So asking people to work a Saturday or two, for a couple of weeks doesn't seem like that much to ask. And in my experience, it actually does seem necessary, I have to say. But that extended, let's go years or months working 6-day weeks, 12, 15-hour days, that can't happen. You just can't allow that to happen. That's a failure of management. That's overscoping a game. That's publishers not understanding how games are made. That's unacceptable, and we have to stop that.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's something you can kind of expect to happen when it's two guys in their basement trying to make their dream project. They cannot manage themselves.
Right, and passion really does count for a lot in this business. At Origin, there were people who kept sleeping bags under their desks and wouldn't leave. You would tell them to leave. Same at Looking Glass. Go home. And they refused because they wanted to make the game great, What are you going to do? Are you going to put them in straitjackets and, get them in a van and take them to an insane asylum? What are you going to do? So there are people like that, and you hope you can help them lead a balanced life. But some people, especially, as you say, on the indie side, if it's a passion project, you're going to work as hard as necessary to make it a real thing.
Of course. I guess this is I mean, recently Underworld Ascendant came out, and there was a lot of expectation, and there was some not great feedback on it, I guess. And it kind of reminded me of what you went through with the second Deus Ex in a way, where maybe it was too much negative feedback for what the game actually was. I don't know. What would you say kind of went wrong, if you think something went wrong?
Just to address Deus Ex Invisible War, I actually think it was a better game than people gave it credit for.
I agree. Maybe because I played it a few years later, so I didn't have all those voices in my head, but I really liked it.
Yeah, I thought we made some mistakes on that game. There's no doubt about it, but I think people's memory of the game is not as good as the actual play of the game, but there's that. On Underworld Ascendant, I think a bunch of things happened. The team was just too ambitious. They had a specific budget within which they had to work. We're an indie developer, and so there was a budget we had to work with. And the team up in Boston, that was not my team. I was working on System Shock 3, but I think they overscoped the game and tried to do too much, and therefore fell short on the things that they were ultimately able to do. So there was that. There was a great deal of time pressure. I don't want to get too far into that, but let's just say the game had to ship when it shipped. And I think everybody knew that was probably too soon. So the thing that I think is important to recognize is that the team committed to sticking with the game and dramatically improving it. And so there have been, I'm trying to remember if the third update has dropped yet, but they've actually changed so much in the game. They've changed the game structure, they've changed the save game system, they've changed narrative elements. So they've really been working on the game, and I wish and hope players who gave it a chance early on will come back to it, or didn't give it a chance, will come back to it and say, hey, these guys really did their work, and they improved the game dramatically. The other thing I think that is a problem is that Kickstarter. You have to tell people what game you're making before you've made the game, which is insane because game development is it's an incredibly iterative process where games change all the time. I mean, if I had told anybody what we were planning for System Shock 3 when we first started, they would be amazed. Maybe not in a good way, maybe in a good way, I don't know, about where we're going now. Games change over the course of development, and people expected us to do exactly what we said we were going to do during the Kickstarter. And what we said in the Kickstarter was, we're going to remake Underworld, the first Underworld. We're going to give you that experience. And at the end of the day, we decided that was not the experience we wanted to deliver. That was a 1992 game. So I think we raised expectations, not necessarily of quality, that's a separate issue, but we raised expectations of what game we were actually going to make, and they didn't deliver on that, to be completely frank. So you put those two things together, we had to ship, we had limited resources, and we didn't deliver the game we promised, and players are going to be upset with you, there's no doubt.
Well, that's fair, I guess. I was just talking with Anya comes from Kickstarter before you, and yeah, I mean, probably one of the issues is that people are used to game being announced much later.
Oh yeah.
They already know what they're gonna be. Not always, but then maybe a lot of gamers cannot discern that Kickstarter is really different from the usual marketing campaign and the usual promises.
Right. Well, I've already been approached to do magazine articles about System Shock 3. We've been offered covers for System Shock 3 already, and it kills me to do it, but I've been saying no. It's too early. I am not ready to talk about the game yet because we're still in that iterative process where we're changing our minds about stuff. As we build stuff, as we get our systems in place, as we can actually play the game, the design is changing. the narrative is changing to reflect the things that we know you can actually do in the game now that we've got it playable. So it's just too early to talk. But when you're, with Kickstarter, and frankly with people's expectations nowadays, players want to be involved in the development process all the way through, and I'm just not comfortable with that. So we're going to keep quiet about System Shock 3 for a while longer.
Okay. And you just said that you're working on System Shock 3 and you weren't really that much involved with other ones, which circles back to what we were saying earlier. I expected you to say the opposite, that, Underworld Ascendant was my game.
Oh, no.
Because we identify you with both games because you're one Spector.
I was what you would call a consultant on it. I played builds, I gave them feedback. Sometimes they took my feedback, sometimes they didn't. No, that was not my game.
Okay. I guess we're good. Well, no, there's one last. I guess you already answered by talking about Florence, but I like to ask at the end, what is the last great game you played and why is it great?
Well, the last game I played was Florence, to completion anyway. And what was great about it, I call it a game-like thing. It tells such a wonderful story about the growth of two people through a relationship, and you advance the story by playing mini games, and they're really clever mini games. I mean, the way they simulate, here the air quotes around that, the way they simulate the way people talk to each other in a relationship and the way the relationship grows and closeness grows is just brilliant. They don't need words. They don't use words. They use game language. Again, here are the quotes around language to express how people communicate or don't. And I thought the story was beautiful. I identified with the characters, and I didn't think it was possible to tell a love story in the context of gameplay. And they proved me completely wrong, So that was a revelation to me. But really, when I'm making a game, I tend not to play very much. So the only gaming I've done is I've played some. I finally got around to playing, West of Loathing. I haven't finished it, but I'm playing West of Loathing because, frankly, I'm just so intrigued by the visual style. I love a game a stick figure game. Oh my God, I would get slammed if I tried to do that. And I've been playing a bunch of Mario Kart. I try to play games that are nothing like what I make. I played Prey, obviously. I haven't played the DLC yet, which I need to do.
Well, that is kind of like what you make.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the best one of the recent kind of like what you do games.
Yeah, Prey was very System Shock-like, that's for sure. But again, I've been playing a lot of System Shock 3 recently. That's mostly what I'm doing.
Of course, that's the best game you've been playing recently.
Not yet. Not yet. It's not. It will be though.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Sure. My pleasure.
Can you tell me how did it start for you, the passion for video games and computers?
Oh God, I was so lucky. When I left school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my grandfather was an engineer. And I loved Victorian engineering. I loved the idea of steam trains where the form and the functionality with the creative solutions to problems that required both aesthetic and technical. And I went to work for Ford, and I was on a program called the Special Engineering Program. This is where our car industry was in a terrible state, and the government was trying to create super engineers, and I was lucky enough to be one of these super engineers. So I had fantastic training in law, in accountancy, in media studies, all of these things. And while I was there, I met a fellow engineer called Richard Turner, and he had just started a games company in 1980. Possibly the first in Europe, possibly. And he disassembled the ROM of the ZX80, so he reverse engineered it so that people could know how to write very efficient code. And one day he said, "Why don't you come and see what I'm doing up in Hull," which is where he lived, which is a city on the east coast of England. And I did, and he showed me some TRS-80 games. Well, actually, to be fair, we became friends because we used to go and play Space Invaders together.
Oh, okay.
Our friendship started when I recommended that we go for a run. So, we got our gym stuff and we went for a run. And a few days later I said, "Well, let's go for a run again." He said, "Okay." He turned up in the car and he said, "I'm going for a run in the car," which is an English expression for "I'm just going to drive."
Okay.
So we just drove to the pub, played Space Invaders, and what we'd do is we'd drive around and find the best Space Invaders, Galaxians, anything else. And one weekend, as I say, he said, "Come, I've got these amazing TRS-80, which was the Tandy computer, imported from America. I reckon we could write some games. You could write some stories." So I wrote my first games for the Sinclair ZX81 in 1981. It needed a 16K RAM pack. The base computer came with 1K. And I love the fact that, I can turn around and say that, my iPhone here has 250 million times, 256 million times as much memory as we had. But back in those days, we wrote a chess program in 1K.
Well,
unbelievable. I mean, what an incredible feat. I had nothing to do with it. So all we did was publish it. It was a programmer called David Horn. But, we were doing the most amazing things. And the interesting thing is that France, Belgium, and I believe Italy were interested in Sinclair, and Germany and the Netherlands and Scandinavia were Commodore. Mm-hmm. So I think, so there was a big division there. But it was great, and we made it up as we went along. One of the games that we decided to write very early on the ZX81 was Galaxians. And I remember Richard asking me, we were talking about it, and saying, "What do we call it? Yeah, can we call it Galaxians?" I don't know. So we just called it ZX Galaxians. And we sold it in WH Smith's, and we kind of assumed that was fine because nobody told us any different, and nobody came after us. And it was amazing. So for about 2 or 3 years, we had this extraordinary golden period where obviously the art form was developing very rapidly, and there were some extraordinary breakthroughs. I remember, Ant-Attack on the Spectrum was so far ahead of anything else. Then Impossible Mission on the Commodore 64 was another one, and you saw these great milestones. And the problem is the company that Richard and I had, Arctic, was fine, and we were commercially very savvy. But for whatever reason, we weren't attracting developers who were really creating the cutting edge, and we kind of fell back. But it was an amazing few years, and I was actually doing this while I was at university. Oh. So again, that was really fun. My best friend was in Leeds. I was in Manchester, and the company was in Hull. So I would every weekend I'd drive, go and see my friend for an hour, have a pint of beer, drive to Hull, work on these things, and at one point we became very successful. Well, not one point, for a year or so, maybe slightly longer. And I'd write these games, which were really easy to write. I'd do it in a weekend, and it would take me, in a week, well, maybe more than a weekend, but not much, while during the holidays. And then I remember WH Smith's. Do you know WH Smith's? Big retailer. Yeah. Right. They were the only retailer selling video games back in the day. And their main buyer was a guy called John somebody or other. And I remember having to find a payphone, because back in those days, the way you'd make a call is you'd phone the person from a phone call, and it would go beep, 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 and you'd put the money in, and then you'd be able to talk. And I felt that, John Rowlands was his name. John must think that we were serious businessmen. Of course he knew exactly who we were. But so I had to go and find a phone that you could put the 10p's in, and I'd phone him up and go, "Oh, John, hello, this is Charles Cecil from Arctic Computing. We have an adventure, a new adventure." And he'd say, "Is it like the last one?" Okay, yep. I said, "Okay, 75,000. And we were charging him probably £3. And And so, okay, yep, okay, yep. We'll be with you straight away. Put the phone down. And then I'd phone the tape duplicating company, which duplicated the tapes, and I'd say, can you produce 5,000 and send them to Robert Smith? And then I'd phone the printer and said, will you send print 5,000 copies of the inlay and send them to Terry? And that was it. And that was it. The odd advert in a magazine. And it was just such fun. Yeah. But I remember the first time you're not going to come to my talk after this, are you?
I don't.
Good, because I'm going to tell some of these things again. So don't. But I remember the first time I met, I was asked to sign one of the games I'd written, and I felt like a rock star. I felt it was amazing. And this young man walked up to me with his young son, and he asked me to sign it, and he talked to me. He said, I managed to convince my wife that I could buy a ZX81 because it would be good for my son's education. Because that was always the excuse.
Yeah, of course.
For the children's homework.
Same for me.
Yeah. And he said, and it all worked fine until she saw us playing your game. And your spelling is so bad. We love the idea that he's reading. But honestly, chisel is not spelt with a Z. Can't should have an apostrophe. Your spelling, you really need to get somebody to check your spelling. And it was a fair cop. But what was lovely is we had the opportunity to talk to fans. And for many years, I really missed that, because then when Arctic effectively, it didn't go bankrupt, but it had no function anymore. We couldn't survive. So I set up a company called Paragon that was doing conversions for US gold. But then when I founded, or four of us founded Revolution in 1990, by that point, games were being sold at retail by publishers. And so we had no idea who our audiences were. We didn't have the opportunity to meet people, which is why, and I know I'm jumping ahead, why it was so wonderful to be able to self-publish Beneath the Steel Sky and then Broken Sword 1 on iPhone back in 2009, 2010. Because for the first time we were able to build a relationship back with our community, which is something I take very seriously.
And I always think that how it works now with indies, with the indie scene, could be, well, you know it better than me, I guess, but it kind of feels similar to how it was in the 80s.
In many ways it is. In many ways it is. Except that now we all really like each other.
Oh.
So we get pleasure out of each other's successes because we don't view each other as competitors.
Okay.
Whereas in the 80s, people did view each other. And the reason was because the United Kingdom was the only market. There was only a finite number of games. And if somebody published a really good game, then it meant that one of the other publishers couldn't. Now the market is effectively infinite. It's infinite. So, if a UK developer does well, then it's not going to affect anybody else. But more importantly, in the adventure scene, if somebody is brought in to, if a gamer starts playing adventures because they bought a different adventure company's game, then that means they're more likely to come and play our game anyway. So the point is that we don't see any conflict of interest in being nice to each other. And broadly, the people in this industry are really nice. Yeah. So we have a really happy time, as proved by Reboot and the fact that everybody's swapping ideas, playing football together. We, as I say, we take great pleasure in each other's successes.
And also the indie scene kind of brought back the point-and-click adventures, because there were a few years, I was doing research and I found an old interview, I think it was when you were working on the third Broken Sword. It was. And you were saying that point-and-click are dead, we have to do something different.
Okay. But okay. What I should have said is on the verge of death. Okay. That's what I should have said, because the problem was that the problem really came about because PlayStation was so successful, and the publishers really believed that the PlayStation audience only wanted visceral 3D games. And so they stopped stocking PC games, or very few PC games, and so adventures were just simply not being stocked. 2D point-and-clicks were not being stocked, which is why for Broken Sword 3 we had to move to 3D.
Which is bizarre because you had success with the first Broken Sword on PlayStation.
Well, exactly. We sold. We were working with Virgin, who are a terrific publisher, but Virgin said they didn't want to publish the game on PlayStation because it wouldn't work. So we said, all right, and we went to Sony directly, and they weren't enormously excited, but they eventually agreed to publish it. In those days, the circulation of the official PlayStation magazine in the UK was 600,000 a month. In Germany, it was probably the same. In France, it was probably the same. So you're talking about 1.5 million. So Broken Sword got 9 out of 10 in each of those magazines. It got extended coverage, and it was cover mounted. To 1.5 million. Imagine what that would cost to do, you know, and it was all done because it was I guess it was part of Sony's, and also, you know, the reviewers really loved it. We got great reviews. And I mean, the funny thing, of course, is that then Virgin, we went to them out of courtesy, we didn't have to, and said, well, do you want to publish Broken Sword 2 on PlayStation? They went, no, it won't work. And that sold. And then when the official PlayStation magazine in the UK did a readers poll for the best PlayStation games ever, Broken Sword 2 came at number 6. It came ahead at Resident Evil. It was insane. It was absolutely insane. And yet, publishers still didn't commission adventure games. I remember the head of Virgin going into, in America, showing me a game called Creature Shock, and saying, stop writing adventures, these are the games that are going to sell. He then told me that he was very proud to say he'd never played a video game, and that's why he made such great decisions on what products to acquire.
Okay, well, I have to say I played the first Broken Sword on PlayStation.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that control system.
Then I went on PC for the second one. Well, the loading time also kind of.
What, on the PC?
On the PlayStation.
Oh yes, I know.
But my PC at the time was an old 486, and so I had to wait. But speaking of those times, I remember when Lure of the Temptress came out, and the whole virtual theater idea, it was so fascinating. And looking at it now, it kind of was a small version of what we see now, at least the concept of what we see now with open world and with characters going around and doing whatever they want.
Well, what we have with Beyond the Steel Sky is very much bringing back the idea of virtual theatre.
I was so disappointed when I didn't see that kind of thing in your following games.
Yeah, and so am I. And I don't know why. We became cautious and became much more point and click. And Beneath the Steel Sky did have a little bit of virtual theatre. Yeah. It had the character walking around, going down in lifts, coming back again, and you could do things. But with Beyond the Steel Sky, at its heart is virtual theatre. It's very much an adventure game. It's absolutely an adventure game, but it uses the idea of a very dynamic world with characters with their own motivations and their own objectives, moving around in the world, doing things.
Okay.
And then also the on the demo that was put together, you can see that there's a bit of link hacking as well. Sorry, hacking it's the link system from first time round, but it's the logic of systems that you can change, and by subverting the systems and by subverting the objectives of people, that creates interesting situations, which creates very dynamic puzzle opportunities. So, everybody says, oh, there are multiple solutions, and up until now, multiple solutions means you've actually written multiple solutions. But what we can do now is we can say the player needs to understand the world, and in doing so, they've got to then work out how they can subvert the characters and so yes, the whole virtual theatre. I've been really wanting to bring it back for nearly 30 years.
Yeah, I guess.
Because it was good, wasn't it?
It was. Well, of course, if you look at it now, it's primitive, but the concept was really fascinating. The idea of, wow, I could follow the guy around and spy on him, and maybe I solve a puzzle by doing that. I think it was completely different from what you could find anywhere else. So that's cool. And you've been talking for a while about doing a new Beneath the Steel Sky, and last year you were saying, yeah, I'm doing a new game, I cannot tell what it is.
I know, I'm not very good at bluffing.
But when did it come out? I mean, is it the thing you had in mind for so many years, or is it something completely new?
It was with Dave Gibbons. It would always have to include Dave Gibbons because he was so important for the first part, and he's a really good friend. I mean, I spent the day with him yesterday. He's a good friend, and he's a very talented guy. It's a real pleasure working with him. And I think it was a couple of years ago. We got together and we worked on we put together some ideas for a game that never really went anywhere. And then we said, we should be doing a sequel to Beneath the Steel Sky. And we started that, and we've been working on it for over a year. Because what I really wanted to do was not announce it so that we wouldn't have pressure. Because the great thing about being an independent developer is that we'd actually earned revenues from Broken Sword 5, made a bit of profit, which meant that we could really go into a prototype stage, and rather than committing to a publisher that it would be finished by this date and it would be this, which is what we would have had to do in the past, now we could just keep working on various prototypes until it was right. And if it was never right, we would not have continued. We would have killed it, because the thing about Revolution is that as an independent developer, if any of our games fail, we go bankrupt. It's as simple as that. And worse than that, we borrow money personally. So, we go bankrupt and we end up personally owing the bank lots of money. So the thing is, but that's good in a way, because it makes us ultra cautious. But that also means that I wake up at night. If something's going wrong, I wake up at night because it would be so catastrophic to go wrong. And in some ways, the idea of actually working for a big publisher and being paid regularly and everything slightly would scare me, because it would take away that absolute determination to get it right.
Yeah, it makes sense, I guess.
The other thing, though, is that I've been writing games now for nearly 40 years, and built a wonderful group of people who trust what I'm going to do next, and to betray that trust would be terrible on so many levels. So that's another thing that's important. I don't want to talk about projects until I'm confident that we're going to do it, because otherwise, I'll maybe hopefully excite people with ideas and then not follow through. And that's a great way to dilute and to alienate your community.
I had so many questions. Why do you think that adventure games and puzzles are so good for telling a story? Because it looks like since
I can tell you why. It's because it is the only genre where the puzzles and the narrative are absolutely intertwined. So when I'm designing puzzles, there's no point in even putting a puzzle in if it's just a blocker. You've got to put a puzzle in that is absolutely related to the narrative as it progresses, so that as you solve the puzzle, the narrative progresses in step. And there is no other genre that does that. Virtually every other genre uses narrative to set up the motivation for the player, and then to reward them for having killed a certain number of people or done whatsoever. So it's a very pure genre. It is it's obviously not one of the mainstream genres. It's a sort of large niche genre, if you like. But to people who are excited, and there's a big difference between adventures that simply use puzzles to block, and those that weave the story into the puzzles, and we certainly try to be the latter. And sorry, just to add,
yeah, sure.
And one of the things that I felt jealous about games like Monkey Island was that if you have slapstick puzzles, then they can come out of the blue. If you've got a monkey and a monkey wrench, you squash a monkey into become a monkey wrench. That's great, but it required a lot less thought than working out exactly what the motivations of the characters were at the time, what the puzzle should be, and why it's in running in tandem with the story.
True, but that was hard to localize.
Yes.
So yes. At least.
and also, to be fair, in those days there was much more difference between English and American, and we didn't use the word monkey wrench. Okay. So it was a problem for us too.
Okay. Oh yeah, and how do you feel about the evolution of the adventure genre and all those narrative games that don't have puzzle? They are basically just a story to follow.
Well, they're great as well, of course. You know, the Wolf Among Us, Walking Dead, you know, they're great games. I think as far as narrative is concerned, the game that I do like The Return of Obra Dinn, but the game that I really like is Inside, because I'm so impressed that the developer can tell a story without one word being spoken or displayed. And I think that intellectually that's such an achievement. So I forgot the question.
How do you feel about these games?
Oh yeah. Right, and you know, her story is a terrific adventure. I think I'd like to think that it's possibly the most dynamic of the genres at the moment, because it's splintering in so many good ways at the moment. And you know, for Beyond a Steel Sky, it's absolutely an adventure, but it's using totally new ideas that a AAA game would never be able to, because they could never take that risk. So the AAA $100 million games are becoming more and more safe, and they're great and they sell well. But the indie games, which are a lot cheap, obviously, you know, a fraction of the price, and we're very lucky because our community wants to love our games, you know, so they're on our side, and so I think it's a terrific genre. I mean, really, you know, the whole Apple Arcade. And I know I wasn't, but you know, but the whole Apple Arcade initiative is absolutely fantastic for indie developers, because what Apple has said is, you know, free to play is great, but you know, I think, you know, they haven't said this directly or directly to me, but I think what they're believing is that for their platform, it's really important that there are interesting indie games and that they not only survive but thrive. And so Apple Arcade offering, you know, a number of really high quality indie games as part of subscription is absolutely, you know, it's changing everything.
But since you mentioned it, then I have to ask.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about the possibility that on that platform, developers will be paid based on how many hours people play their game.
Yeah, I honestly can't talk about that.
Okay.
But what I can talk about is the fact that, you know, that Apple were generous, but that there is no restriction on the PC version or the console versions, and that they can come whenever we want. They can come at the same time or after. And
so you're not bound by any kind of exclusive?
Nope.
Okay.
And that there's no sense that any platform will be held back by any other. So, you know, we're writing it across. I have to say, but in on the new iPads with HDR, it does look absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
I can imagine. Okay, the last question I give to everybody. Maybe you already answered it by talking about Inside, but I ask, what's the last great game you played and why is it great?
Well, the last game I played was actually The Return of the Obra Dinn.
Okay.
So, and what I really liked about that was that it truly is a story that you can tell in your own way, in your own order. And as you do so, this extraordinary backstory, this incredible, you know, his story of the ship just emerges from gameplay. You know, Lucas Pope is a very smart developer, and you know, everybody was excited by what he was going to do, and he hasn't disappointed.
May I ask you how you started with your passion for video games or computers?
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago. The first video game I played was called Gorillas. My dad had gotten a computer when I was 6 years old, and on that computer was MS-DOS, because this was the early 90s, and there was one game on the computer. It was called Gorillas, and it was actually a tutorial file for a programming language called QBasic. So the only way you could start the game was by loading the code and then running it, and then the game would start. And I found that out through experimenting. Like I didn't know English back then because I'm from the Netherlands. I'm half Dutch, half Egyptian. So I just kind of tried stuff until something cool happened, and the something cool that happened was Guerrilla started. So I was a pretty curious kid, so at one point I decided that I wanted to know what all the letters on the screen were before the game started. And I changed the main menu text to just say my name instead. So I started gaming and game developing on the same day. Pretty much, because I wanted to play the game, but I also modified the code. I had no idea what I was doing. I broke the code very soon after, and then I couldn't play the game anymore. But yeah, no, I was 6, and I basically, seeing my name on the main menu screen, realizing that I had changed this video game by typing words. That was fascinating, and I just never stopped doing that. Like I modded games for years, which was way easier back then because all the files were plain text. There was no protection. Nobody cared about like piracy. It was just, like all the files were open, and so it was really easy to mod. I kept kind of doing that until I was like 15, 16 years old, and then I met this developer from Boise, Idaho, working on a series called the Star Wraith 3D space series. They're these space sims, but he was making games on his own, and I was super impressed by that. He was using a programming language that I was using back then. So I was just super impressed by that, and I wanted to be like that. I wanted to make my own video game. So around age 16 or something, I was inspired to do it as a job.
Okay. And then you went to university and you met the other half.
Yeah, I met JW. Yeah, I didn't like JW, and we both dropped out, which is not a good idea. But it worked out for us. It's not.
I noticed that now you add that it's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea. It's genuinely. I have an Egyptian dad and a Dutch mom, and the Egyptians are very much like it's not a rich country, right? So people are very much like, okay, you have 4 opportunities in life. You can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be an engineer, or you can be a disgrace to the family. Okay. And that's sort of your 4 options, right? My mom is very Dutch, so for her, it's more like find something that you love, right? So when I told my parents that I was going to drop out of university, my dad was like, "What?" And my mom was like, "If that makes you happy, I guess." Like in hindsight, there's a million ways it could have gone wrong, right? And I'm from a country in the Netherlands where healthcare is very good and the social support network is really good. So even if things didn't work out, I'd be fine. But I have to sort of recognize that people pay attention to things I say on a global scale now. And like in the Netherlands, it's not a terrible idea to drop out. It's not a good idea because the paper is very 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 valuable. And I ended up actually graduating a few years later through other means, basically. But that having officially graduated opened a lot of doors for me in terms of travel and visas and consulting. So I ended up graduating in the end. It's just in a very long roundabout way. Because that paper ends up being valuable. But I do think that the way my life went would not have happened if not for that brief dropping out thing. So it's not. I say it's not a good idea because it's one of those things where a lot of people hear that story, right? They hear this person dropped out and started a big company. This person dropped out and started a big company. But what you don't hear is this person dropped out and then achieved nothing. Right? This person dropped out and then was barred from every job they loved because they didn't have papers. This person dropped out and lived in poverty for the rest of their life. You don't hear those stories, and there's actually way more of those than there is of the this person dropped out and then has their dream job and if it wasn't an integral part of how me and JW ended up working together, I would just not tell that story at all because I don't think it's a good story. Yeah. It's just a true story, so I can't avoid it. So.
And you said now you are on a world stage and people all around the world listen to what you say, and you've used this and maybe also the success you've had with your games as a leverage, I guess, to do a lot of good things for the community.
Yeah.
Is that something you always you thought of from the beginning, or was there a moment where you thought, okay, now I should give back? I mean,
there was let's put it this way. I've always wanted to help. Like I've always wanted to help people. Like it's something that there's photos of me as a kid, like trying to teach another kid how to bike, right? Because I could and they couldn't. I think it's just very much in my DNA to try and be helpful, right? Like it's how I perceive value as a human being is how many other people can you empower and encourage to do something that they want to do, right? For games, I think, so what happened is very early on, we were in the Netherlands, and the games press in the Netherlands is small, right? The actually press in the Netherlands is small because it's a country of 15 million people, and those are the only people on the planet that speak Dutch, right? There's a few more across a bunch of islands near the US, and there's, South Africa speaks like a form of Dutch, Afrikaans, so they can kind of understand it, but like they're not going to be reading Dutch newspapers, right? The only people reading Dutch newspapers is like the 15 to 20 million people living in the Netherlands. Which means that if we got our game in the largest newspaper in the Netherlands, of those 20 million, 5 million people read a newspaper. Of those 5 million people, like maybe 1 million cares about video games a little bit, and then of those 1 million, 5% cares about indie games, and then of that, only a small percentage cares about the type of indie games we're making. So even if we did like the largest press outreach we could, we were very limited in our reach. So we decided we needed to go to London.
Okay.
Because if we could get our article in The Guardian or in, on an English website, then maybe we would reach enough people. And so we tried that. And it was very helpful that we'd been in Dutch press before, right? Because we could at least like point to that and be like, no, we are newsworthy, you just haven't heard of us. But the solution we found was, I've always is a big word, but since I was younger, I've done public speaking. I'm mostly trained through something called Model United Nations, which is this high school thing where kids simulate the workings of the United Nations. You all play a country, and then you try to like create resolutions to gain optimal benefit for your country, right? So I'd practice on public speaking a bit, and I decided, like, why not try that? I've heard there's like these conferences, and maybe if I go there, they can pay for the flight or the hotel. So I started doing public speaking in the Netherlands, and then one time there was a guy from England who invited me to speak at an event in London, and they could pay for me. So I flew out, and I did that talk. And it went really well, and then I got invited to a bunch more talks. So I started doing this thing where not all events could pay for flights and hotels. So I would ask one event to pay for my flight, and then I would already be in a country. So then I asked for other events that were nearby, and then just do very short flights that were very cheap, and then they would pay for my hotel. So then I only needed to get like a couch to crash in the first city, right? So I did that for a while, where I just started like flying around like to every event that would have me. I would submit talks to every event, and that got pretty popular real fast. So at some point I started getting these emails from like Uruguay, from like Indonesia, from like India, and I'm like, wow, there's these game developers everywhere, right? And like, part of me knew that because I'm half Dutch, half Egyptian, and in my history I'd always seen like, I would see Dutch stuff, I'd see that, everywhere, but Egyptian stuff I would never see anywhere but in the Arab world, right? It never got out of that. We were using the wrong alphabet, we were using like different types of storytelling, our music is on like a different tempo, like it didn't translate to the Western world, and the Western world was the world that sort of controlled the world, right? So part of me was like, these people are just people, like the Egyptians, they're making culture. It's just not culture that the West finds interesting, so they kind of get like blanketed out. So I wanted to go, and I would ask
that the West just can find.
Yeah.
Even they don't even get to see if it's interesting.
Yeah. That's why there's only been one Nobel Prize for literature for an Arab. It's not because they don't write good books. They write incredible books. It's just only 2 people in the Nobel jury can probably read Arabic. It's hard to like judge a literary work by translation. So what happened is I started getting all these requests, and I would go like, okay, can you pay for my flight? And they'd be like, no, we're like 14 people in this country making games, like we don't have money. And I'm like, well, I can't afford it either. So I guess sorry, but like maybe in the future, you know. And then in 2013, yeah, it was 2013, Ridiculous Fishing came out, and it was our first hit. We did Super Crate Box, which was critically well received, but it was freeware. We did Serious Sam the Random Encounter, which it did well, but didn't do great. We did Gun Gods, which was effectively a Kickstarter reward. Ridiculous Fishing was our first hit. It was the first game we did where we made a lot of money. Enough to like carry the company for long enough to make new games, right? And that was a big deal. Like that's where you want to be as a studio. You want to make a game that pays enough that you can make your next game, right? But this was way more money than that. So I went to my co-founder and I told him, mate, is it okay if I take some of this money and go visit all these places that have been emailing me? And he said like, what did he say? He says like, sure, what do we make money for if it's not to help people? Like, okay, good. Like we agree on this thing, and it's not common that we agree. No. But he was just immediately he was like, yeah, no, do it.
It's also not common to think like that.
Yeah, I think both of us have a very similar mindset. Like we want things to be good for people. He just likes thinking of that on like a micro scale. Like how do you make it good in a company, right? Like how do you make it good in a studio? And I like to think of that on a community scale. How do I make it good globally, right? But both of us are very aligned on that. Like we believe in game development, but we also believe that game development should be good for game developers, right? So I started doing that. And through that, I started getting exposed to all these people around the world that are making games in harder circumstances, much harder circumstances sometimes, with less opportunity, with less, like reassurance of success, with less ability of success. Not because they're worse game developers, because conditions are worse. And I learned so much from them. Like I've been learning from them for like years, and I've been getting inspired by how much perseverance they need, right? Because I made games, and that was hard. Like I had to convince my parents that this was a real job. I had to like drop out of university and like start my company. I had to like live on nothing for like 2.5 years while we made our first games. Like it was hard. And then I go to somebody and they have like a stack of paper that's just like printed code. And I'm like, why do you print your code? And they're like, oh, sometimes the electricity goes out for a week. Like, and somehow you decided that game development was a good idea. And they're like, yeah, we love game development. I'm like, you love it way more than I do. Like, I love game development. I cannot imagine doing anything else. But if my power went out for a week, I'm like, if that happened frequently, I'm not sure if I could do that. But these folks, like they're in Africa, they do that.
Yeah, I've been to the last two, One Reason to Be, and it's really humbling to listen to those stories and then think, well, I have paid expenses to go to San Francisco.
Yeah, and it's stuff like that where you're just like the amount of, every time I see a game from those territories, right, from less privileged territories, I think of how much effort it must have taken to make that game. Mm-hmm. And every time it's humbling, right? Like every person I've had on One Reason to Be is a miracle that they not only started game development, but continued in game development long enough that somebody like me who's looking for them can find them. Mm-hmm. That's hard. That's very hard because I'm actively looking, right? Like I'm really searching for people, but they're still hard to find because I'm watching from like very zoomed out, right? Like I'm going around the planet all the time. Finding a single person that's doing good work is surprisingly hard. Doesn't mean they're not everywhere. It just means that it's hard to find people on like the fast, like I'm in a country for 3 days. Mm-hmm. Like finding the good stories is hard. But knowing that they've worked so hard and then one person recognizes that, right? In England, that's really easy. You go to a game development meetup and you meet like Mike Bithell or, like Alexander Slawinski or anybody of the UK Kotaku crew or the UK IGN crew or whatever, right? And now you're a story. Do that in like Uruguay, very different story. Yeah. So I'm just always so humbled when I meet people like that because like I had to fly to London. That was it, right? It was like a 60-minute. It's not even a 60. It's a 55-minute flight. That was it. That was the difference between we were in the Netherlands and sort of isolated, and we were in the global mindset. 55 minutes.
And this is where the idea for game dev work came from, I guess?
A little bit, yeah. So think of it as two things. I would fly to all these countries and I would meet these amazing people, but I would never see them at GDC. Mm-hmm. That's frustrating. And I realized it's money, right? In 2013, I did a blog post that per country in the world, I calculated how expensive it feels to go to GDC. Now, how expensive it is, because it's kind of the same price everywhere around the world. You pay for your flight, you pay for your ticket, you pay for any like legal costs. So that's one. Like costs are high, right? I calculate per country how much it feels, and there's countries where it feels like $130,000, right? That's too much. Nobody can afford that. So there's visas, which are really hard to get, especially if you're not Western. Getting a visa for the US right now is incredibly hard. And third, you have to speak English pretty well to get any value out of GDC. Because you know, like the press in England is like, oh, don't write a press release with a typo, and I'm like, what? How's your French? Like, get out of here. Like, that's not how it works. Like, people from different countries might make typos in their emails. Like, it's your job to read the email. Sure, if there's a typo, that's not great. Whatever. So to get value out of GDC, you have to be good at English. You have to be able to understand the talks, which are high-level technical talks very often. You have to be able to network in English comfortably. You have to be able to like figure out what is happening on the fly, which very often you just kind of overhear people talking about something. You go like, oh yeah, that's cool. Can I come to that? Right? Like all that becomes very hard if your first language is like French or you know, like Vietnamese, and your English is like okay. Then the second thing is, I went to this event in Russia, DevCon, and I did the keynote, the opening keynote, like first talk of the day, and the entire room was full, right? It was awesome. I gave the talk. At the end, you know, I start talking to people, and it takes me about 2 hours to get out of a conversation like that, right? There's just like 20, 30 people, and they all wanted to talk and chat and like show me their games. I love doing that. So I enjoyed like talking to people, and after 2 hours, I realized that my headphones were still on the stage, right? In the lectern. So I went back, and I couldn't get in the room because there was a queue, just like 20, 30 people in the opening, and I had to go like, excuse me, sorry. Go through. So there's this guy on stage. I've never seen this guy. Never heard of this guy, right? There's this guy on stage. The room is full, but there's also people standing against the walls on both sides. There's like 30 people like in the room, like standing behind the chairs as well. And then there's just people in the hall. And I'm like, what is happening? Is this like is it awards or like they're like, no, this guy made this game. And I'm like, what is that game? They show me on the front. I'm like, I've never seen this game. They're like, oh, it's this big hit. It's like everybody's playing it. I'm like, is it Russian? They're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, what is he talking about? It's like, oh, how he designed the game and like sort of like the market in Russia. I'm like, I wish I could hear this, but it's in Russian. This guy doesn't speak English, not well. And like, I wish I could hear this talk. So those are the two things that led to game dev world. Like, one, I want knowledge from the English-speaking world, from the Western world, to be spread around the world, because in many ways, English is the lingua franca of our time, which means that it communicates relatively well across the world, right? It's also sort of like the heart of game development. So it's, in many ways, there's a lot of knowledge there that has only been formalized into English. Game theory is overwhelmingly English, game academics are overwhelmingly English, and sure, there's activity around the world, but in general, sort of like the heroes of game development speak English, right? So I want some of that knowledge to be translated outbound. But the other thing I really want to happen is people to realize that that's not actually true, right? Game development heroes are everywhere. Some of the best designers live in like Argentina, right? One of the latest game design theory books was written in Arabic, right? Some of the most interesting indie games come from Japan, even though Japan is not a country that has traditionally embraced indie. There's people there, and their perseverance leads to incredible games. So what GameDev.world is not an event where we translate English to 8 languages. No, what we do is we take the 8 of the largest spoken languages in the world, 8 of the largest read languages in the world. We take English, French, Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, simplified Chinese, and Japanese. With those languages, we cover about 70% of the planet. We will have talks in all of those languages, and all of those talks will be translated to all of those 8 languages. So if you're a Spanish developer and you really want to hear about like community development, you're going to talk about community development from a Russian developer, which has conditions that are way more similar to Spain than the US. It's going to be way more interesting. You're going to talk about like how to set up a community from French-speaking Africa. It's going to be way more relevant to a studio in like South America than it is going to be listening to the same talk from like the UK, right? So around the world, we have this incredible collection of knowledge, and I've had the privilege of going there and talking to people, and those people don't meet each other because they don't speak the same language. So for 1 day, 2 days, June 21st to 23rd, I want to break the language barrier and make the games industry global, just for 2 days.
It's amazing. I can imagine it's been a huge pain to organize.
Pain is not the right word. It's been very challenging. Okay. It's been very challenging. The translation is hard. We're doing closed captioning, which means we need people who can translate really fast, but also people who can type really fast. And you can't translate like French to English and then to Spanish. You have to translate French to Spanish, right? So we need interpreters. And in fact,
even though that's a lot of localization work that way.
Yeah, but we can't do it
through English and
but we can't do it live. It's too much. It's too much information. And it's too much jargon, right?
Sure.
So we reached out to some of the biggest game translation companies, and they just don't do interpretation. They do translation, right? You give them an Excel sheet, they translate it, and they return the Excel sheet. Sure. These are not people who can like translate as conversations are going. They need time. So we need interpreters. Now, to find enough interpreters for different languages that are specialized in games doesn't exist. So I started going to like normal interpretation companies, and every single one of them said, this is too big. We can't do it. And eventually I started to realize that Game Dev World might be the 5th largest interpreted event in the world. The United Nations, European Union, FIFA, and the Eurovision Song Contest. Those are the 4 things that are bigger. But 8 languages to 8 languages, that's a matrix of 64. That means at base occupation, we need 64 interpreters. Those 64 interpreters can work for 2 hours. Then they need a break. So we need 64, but then we need 2 teams of that, right?
Yeah.
And then they also need to sleep.
Of course.
So we need an additional 64 of that. And that's just the translators. They listen and then they speak, but they're not typing. So then we need typists in the 8 languages. And those typists can hit a 99.7% accuracy. But they can only work for so much time before they're tired. So we also need backup velo typists, as they're called, in all of those languages. And then getting like a translator from English to French, not that hard, right? An interpreter. Getting around from like Chinese to Russian, okay. Chinese to Brazilian Portuguese, a little harder, you know, like Russian to like Spanish, a little harder. So it's been a challenge. It's been interesting. That's just the logistical part. There's obviously also very much a moral, ethical part of this, because making everybody agree and sort of feel at ease in the space is relatively easy if you're looking at similar people. But as soon as you start looking at a global scale, making sure that an event is organized in such a way that a Chinese person, an American person, and an Arab person all feel at ease in the same space is relatively hard. Like, if you look at a country that's gender segregated, like Saudi Arabia, and you look at a country that's very against that notion, like the US, or at least game developers in those countries are, in the US are, you get this interesting question. Because in Saudi Arabia, feminism, progression, would be to put everybody in a space together, right? Put the women and the men in a space. Well, in the US, there's been a lot of discussion about like safe spaces in the last few years, where women can also have space that's separate from men. That's like the opposite. They're literally the opposite thing, right? And this is an example that's a few years old, like things have changed a little, but the idea is that defying patriarchy in both those countries had fully opposite expressions. So if you told people, if you put an American in Saudi Arabia and said we need safe spaces, that'd be like one of the most like regressive things you could possibly say. Doing that on a global scale, 70% of the world can listen to this and then go like, okay, how do we avoid as many cultural problems as possible while still allowing everybody to be true to themselves? That's been fascinating. It's been really hard. Our biggest questions have not been about like how do we broadcast this or how do we translate it. It's been like, how do we make sure everybody feels comfortable in a space that is this global? And I don't think anybody's done it. Like some of the questions that we have are honestly questions for which there's no documentation. Nobody ever wrote about them. Nobody ever came across this problem. Nobody ever had this issue. I genuinely think Game Dev World might be the 5th largest interpreted event in the world, which is silly because it's a team of 5 people who really believe something should happen. A team of 6 people that really believe something should happen and that this is the future. Right? It's 2019. There's no reason that this shouldn't be possible. And honestly, people say like the translation must be really expensive if you have that many people work for you. Honestly, on an event scale, it's not that much. For me, it's a lot of money. I'm an individual. Like,
yeah, of course.
But if it was necessary, my company, which is just a single game studio, could pay for it. Right? We have a ton of amazing sponsors, so luckily we don't have to pay for it. But it's not unaffordable. It's not like, like the larger conferences in our industry couldn't do this. Having interpreters ready for people to speak whatever language they want is not cost prohibitive. Just nobody does it because it's not expected. Because who wants to listen to a Spanish speaker at GDC? Like honestly, I do. Like Gris, prettiest game of last year, right? Yep. Nintendo Switch, beautiful. The Conrad Rosé, who made the game, his English is okay. He doesn't necessarily feel super comfortable being on a stage speaking English. So we gave him a speaking spot at Game Dev World because I want to hear that story. I want to hear where the art style came from, what history in his background as animator, in animation, in movie led to Gris, right? Like I want to hear that story. Just I'm never going to hear it at GDC because they don't want to pay for an interpreter. I'm never going to hear it at Res. I'm never going to hear it at EJX. Because it's just not something we think about. It's not even that they can't afford it. They can. It's just they've never considered this.
Well, maybe Game Dev World will start something.
So here's the hope. I'm a strong believer. I made something called DuPresskit, right?
I wanted to ask you about that.
So DuPresskit was an accident, but it was a good accident. I made this free tool that developers can use to make a press kit. I don't earn anything of that. I've never, there's no ads. It's just entirely free a tool because I believe the playing field for marketing should be equal. More importantly, I released it for free because I realized there were all these publishers popping up that all they did was they would write a press release, make a press kit, and send it to press. And they would charge 30% of a game's revenue for that because indies were getting desperate for visibility. I'm like, this should not happen. If a publisher wants to earn 30%, they should work for it. And making a press kit is not work. Right? It takes time and it's annoying and there's knowledge involved. But maybe I can standardize it. Right? Maybe if I do it free and I do it really good, right? And I do it first. Nobody made a press kit system before I did, right? So I did that. I made it very good. I talked to press everywhere. I talked to developers everywhere. I asked, what do you need? What do you need? Right? Put all that together into one press kit and then released it for free before anybody else did it. Here's the thing. If you do something like that, you set a bar. Right? If you can make it popular, you set a bar. And the point with setting a bar is that means that if anybody wants to charge money for a similar service, they have to do better than me. Right? So that's the hope of Game Dev World. The hope is that we're going to be first. We're going to be the first virtual conference like it, right? The first virtual conference that is multilingual. There's been other ones, but they're usually in one language. They're usually quite focused on a niche. We're doing a game developers conference. This is for game developers, whether you're AAA, whether you're indie, whether you're small, new, student, we don't care. No matter what language you speak, as long as you can understand one of the 8 languages we support, right? We do it free because that way anybody, no matter what, can watch. All our talks will be transcribed, they'll be safe, they'll be available, there'll be a library, you can access that, unlike a lot of other events where you have vaults or access passes or something like it. We're just free. We believe information should be available to anybody. If you are going through the pain and effort of becoming a game developer in a country that doesn't love or understand game development, then you deserve access to knowledge. That shouldn't be an extra barrier. You have so many barriers already. We don't need another one, right? And the final thing is, I want to make sure that this is good. Because if we do it good, if we have interesting talks, if we manage to hit the translation at 99.7% time, right? If we set that bar high, anybody else who wants to do virtual conferencing will have to start at that bar. That'll be the lowest. If you want to do a virtual conference and you do it free, you can do whatever you want, right? If you want to do a charity event, do whatever you want. If you're a small developer in a small country throwing a local conference virtually, do whatever you want. If you want to charge money for it, here's the bar. 8 languages, good, high production value, free. Everything transcribed at the end. If you want to do anything less, why would people pay for that? There's a better alternative, it's free.
Sure.
So that's it, we're setting the bar. And we're setting it as high as we can. And maybe we won't get it all the way up this first year, right? We're trying really hard, but it's a tough production. But then we'll do it next year. And we'll just keep going until we set the bar that high. And when we set the bar that high, that'll be the standard.
Well, and I mean, we'll see how it works, but what you're planning, it is high.
It is high, it's very high. It's because I believe that there's no major event that cannot do this. We have 30,000 developers signed up. That's more than GDC. We're now bigger than the Game Developers Conference. That's the largest game developers conference in the world. We have not announced a single speaker. Right? We have only announced that this is happening. The amount of interest there is for this is incredible. It's just so far it's always been good enough to just reach out to local developers, right? And GDC grew big enough that it doesn't have to do reach out. People go to GDC. I have no problems with GDC. I love GDC, one of my favorite events of the year. But it's not enough. It's not fair, right? And they can't help that. They have a model, they're doing that. So I'm basically challenging every event in the world. Like five complete nobodies did this, right? Like, sure, I have a reputation in the industry. Sarah O'Malley is a well-known voice actress, but we have no event experience. We've never thrown an event. I've helped on Train Jam. That's it. I've helped organize Mega Booth. That's all event experience I helped.
It's a different scale.
This is ridiculous. It's absurd. Like as a first attempt, this is obscene. And we've got help from so many talented people throughout the industry, event organizers. And to be honest, you know what my favorite thing is? Most of these big events, they've gotten behind us. Most of those big events went like, no, this is awesome. So we'd love to know how this goes, because they want to do similar things. It's just, it's hard to justify that to the boards, right? It's hard to justify to the people with the money to go like, no, we want to do an event, we want to translate it. And people go like, why? Everybody speaks English. And it's like, no, listen, there's a huge market outside of the English. And they're like, no, English market is fine. And if I can just prove that by going multilingual, that more people will come, then they will be able to go to their boards and go like, no, we should actually make sure there's support for Spanish and Portuguese. And so a lot of these events have gone behind us. A lot of people think that Game Dev World is like a big like, fuck you to all the other events. It's not. Game Dev World is a compliment, it's an addition. We're not competing with them. We're showing them that you are here and this is cool, but there's all this left. And there's space, like go there as well, like please come there. Because like I would love nothing more than for GDC to open in South America, right? And to open again in China. And I would love for nothing more than to see Indicate expand from in the US and France to like the US, France, and like Russia, right? I would love for nothing more for all these events to be our competitors. Right? I would love that. It would be great. But right now, we're not competitors because we're not even in the same game. We're doing a completely different thing because nobody else tried this. So, events in Russia, DevCon, got behind us in a really big way. Like they've been very supportive. They've helped us like source Russian speakers. They have an amazing network out there. They did that because for them, this is positive as well, right? They can do with more events in Russia. So they get behind it. And that's actually been the most heartwarming thing. Like I thought this would be a fight. right? It would be a fight to convince game developers to sponsor it. It would be a fight to convince publishers and platforms to get behind it. It would be a fight to get these other events to help us. It's not been a fight. Everybody gets it. And I don't know when that happened, because I remember 5 years ago that discussion was very different. People would be like, the Arabs don't really play video games. And now it's like, no, absolutely. Like, we should make sure that everybody has access.
Cool.
It's been cool, yeah.
I can't wait.
Yeah, me too.
Let me check, because I don't want
go for it.
Too long. Okay, just a couple of more questions.
Yeah.
You're very active on Twitter. Every time I open Twitter, there's Rami Ismail posted something. Is it just something you enjoy, or do you want to be there and drive a conversation?
I think I like, so I've asked people that follow me every now and then. I DM some people like, why do you follow, right? Like, just as I think what people appreciate about my Twitter is it's a relatively good source of news, and it's a very specific perspective on news. Like, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, but I'm not a gamer.
Okay.
Right? Like, I play video games. I love video games. I play at least 2 hours a day. It's a rule. Like, I know a lot of game developers don't have time to play games. I made a rule. I have my Switch with me. I have a gaming laptop with me. I've been playing Sekiro. Love the game. But my perspective is that of a game developer. And it's not a game developer, it's a game developer that also has a very active role in sort of like the overall structure of how our industry works, how it evolves, and like I try to be involved in as many of those discussions to help steer the industry in a way that I think is positive for as many developers as possible. Now, that means that my perspective is very much sort of like a bird's eye view. Like, I'm both in the trenches and sort of like flying over, and it's kind of a weird combination because you can't really be both. I kind of switch between the two. I think what people appreciate is sort of like the news that I find interesting is just a very odd mix of news that people normally wouldn't pay that much attention to. Like, I'm involved in like stock movement. I'm interested in like the stock movements because they sort of indicate where trust in the industry is. A lot of people don't care about that, and they would not be wrong, right? I'm interested in diversity. I'm interested in like inclusivity. I'm interested in like game design. I'm interested in programming. Like, I have a very broad set of interests in the industry, and what I find interesting apparently is interesting to a lot of people. So whenever I find something interesting, I tweet about it. And then that kind of meant that a lot of conversations that I find fun or interesting also happen on Twitter.
Yeah.
Which means I end up retweeting and tweeting a lot. I tweet too much. That's honestly, it's fair. And I've had people unfollow me because I tweet too much.
To me, it's fine.
Well, it's entirely fair. Like that's kind of the beauty of Twitter, is that you can just follow as many people as you want. The ugliness of Twitter is that people can tweet at you no matter whether you follow them.
Yeah.
But I've honestly, Twitter can be an incredibly toxic and incredibly like risky place. I became an independent developer because I just want to say what I want to say, right? And as I grew in responsibility in the industry, as I grew in reach, I've been trying to be more and more aware of phrasing things in the way that best communicates what I'm trying to say. And I still get that wrong. I did a joke yesterday that was very unfortunate about the black hole, right? The photo of the black hole. It made me think when I was a kid, I would, in Photoshop, I would hit render clouds and then just like play with blend layers. And I got pictures that looked exactly like that. And I tweeted that. And obviously a lot of people were like, well, that's not a great joke because this is like thousands of hours of work by like very good scientists. And I was like, you know what, you're right. Like, I messed up. I deleted the tweet. I normally never delete tweets, but like with this one, as the context grew, it turns out there was a large group of people that were making similar jokes, but they were all not sarcastic about it. I was making the joke and I was like, this is an incredible achievement, but also it reminds me of a thing I did as a kid. And they were just like, this is bullshit science. I can do this in Photoshop in 30 seconds. So because that context evolved, I deleted my tweet, which I normally just don't do. I believe like learning from your mistakes and making mistakes publicly. I believe in that. But yeah, that one had to go. But like, I've very much grown up in that public, right? I started Twitter when I was 20. I started Flambeer when I was 20. My career has been in public. Every mistake I've made in public. Every fuck up I've done in public. Every time I've offended somebody, I've done it in public. Every time I've apologized, I've done it in public. And I don't want to say it's comfortable, but I feel it's a very good way to stay grounded. Like, it's a very good way of knowing, like, okay, listen, these people are yelling at me, I'm probably doing good work, right? These people are yelling at me, I probably messed up. And it's very much a litmus test of am I doing good, right? If the right people are supporting me on Twitter, the small game developers, the experimental game developers, the larger game developers, the organizations that sort of like run the industry at large, if those are sort of like engaging with what I'm doing, then I'm probably doing good work. And if it's the Gamergaters yelling at me and like the angry folks on Twitter and the people that just say like, oh, we don't care about developers, if they're yelling at me, I'm probably doing good work. But if that last group is like being supportive of me, I'm probably doing something wrong, right? And if the industry isn't engaging with me in a positive way, I'm probably doing something wrong as well. So like I said, since I was a kid, I've always wanted to be the kid that helps the other kid learn how to ride a bike, right? And the best way to see whether you're helping somebody learn to ride a bike is to see them bike, right? The best way for now to follow where games industry conversation is Twitter. And it's a small part of the industry, right? Like a lot of AAAs aren't on Twitter, but as a global institute in the games industry, the games medium, Twitter is the best place to follow it right now. And as long as that's true, I'll keep my ear to it, and I'll keep talking to see what people send back.
And of course, on Twitter, you get a lot of rage for some things you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think I don't know, maybe it's disingenuous by me to think so, but the game community, it started many years ago, they were a niche. You would think they would be open.
Yeah.
And there's of course not all of them, but there's misogyny and racism.
Yeah, I think what's happening is so here's the thing. When things feel threatened, they lash out, right? That's sort of like a truth of humanity throughout. Like, the most dangerous thing is a cornered animal, right? The games community, by and large, is a super supportive, super positive group, right? I go to PAX, I meet thousands of gamers, and they're all positive. They're all excited. They all just want to play games. They love video games. I travel around the world. Every convention I go to, it's the same thing. Gamers love games. They love this medium. They love the people working on it. They love the people that give them these games, right? That create these experiences for them. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how games are made. That's our mistake. As an industry, that's our mistake. For decades, we've told people we know exactly what we're doing. The reality is, there's not a single game developer in the world that knows what they're doing, because if we did, it wouldn't be interesting. We're creatives. If we knew exactly what painting we were going to paint, we wouldn't paint it, because we know. Like, we know how to do it, we know the techniques, and then we get a painting that looks like the other painting. Even a series that people say are derivative, like the Call of Duties, the Battlefields, like, are some of the most interesting design and narrative experiences in the world. Are just like the next shooter. People make fun of FIFA being the same game every year. The amount of work and processing power that goes into the ball in a FIFA game is larger than any game I've made. The teams that work on that do more interesting physics work than anything I've ever done. And I have a good career in the industry, right? They're doing fascinating work. Like, how does the ball stick to the foot? Does it stick to the foot? Does the player, if the ball doesn't stick to the foot, what happens when the player turns but the ball is not on their foot? Did I lose the ball? Is that fun? They're playtesting this. They're iterating. Every year, FIFA is a joy for me to play. Just go like, okay, what did they change? Because they can't change that much from soccer. It has to be soccer. Right? It has to be football. But all these little things are just fascinating to me. Like, I find it one of the most interesting series in the world. But we haven't taught players that. We've always been like, we know what we're doing, and we're fine, we're perfect, right? We never make mistakes. The truth is, the industry is in upheaval right now. We don't know what we're doing. We don't even know how to make money right now. Like, that's why you see all the experiments. We did DLC. People hated DLC because there was discussion about, oh, this content was cut from the main game. So, okay, no DLC, season passes then. So we'll create content over a larger period of time, and then people just pay for the pass, and then they'll just get all the DLC we make from now on. So that was closer to like live games. And then people liked that, and that did well. And then there was live service games that were mobile, and they were making way more money than all these AAA games. So then the AAAs were like, wait, why are we not doing that thing where you just buy like a hat or something? So then games had to adjust to that. And honestly, most AAAs have no experience making that. Like, you look at a game like Anthem, you look at a game like Destiny, you look at these like big live games that are being made right now, they're experimenting as they go. They're not launching the game in the best state they could because they don't even know what that looks like. We're just trying. And that's honestly the truth of the games industry. We're just trying. We don't know. We're like, I don't know how to make a game with fishing with machine guns. It's not like there's not a book that goes like, well, if you make a game about fishing with machine guns, you have to be really careful about that. Like, it's just not. We're experimenting. We're creatives. We're painting a painting, and the painting might walk away because it's computers and they're weird, right? The market might change, right? Like, we have no idea. We're literally just trying. So, but that makes that if we make a mistake, a lot of people think we're making it intentionally because we're perfect, right? So that's been our fault. And we need to do a better job of communicating from the industry just how unsure we are of things, right? That we don't always have the answers, that we're really trying. And I think as a whole, the industry has been better at community management than ever before. We've been better at communicating with people, we've been more open, we've been more genuine. We haven't gone like, we don't do the like PR statement as often anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, we hear your feedback. We'll have a team, we'll look at it. And you know, like, we can't guarantee that we will change something, but like, let it be known that we heard you. And it might sound like PR bullshit. Like, honestly, that's game development. You listen to feedback, you filter it through what your own intent is, what your own goals are, and then out comes a solution. And very often it's a different solution than people think. That's game development as well. And then the final thing is, you've got the assholes. And honestly, the assholes, they're a small group, they're a loud group, and they're loud for a reason. It's because they're going extinct, right? Like, as a medium, we're more supportive, more inclusive, more accessible, more diverse. There's more consideration for like everything from like a disability to like nationality, from language to like a skill level. There's more games than ever, in more genres than ever, with different outlooks on life than ever. Like, trying to be the angry gamer, right, that yells at everything and that is protective of their niche little nerd culture, it's gone. It won't survive. They'll keep yelling for as long as they're around, and they'll keep like, sure, like they'll bring new people in, and there'll be kids that go with it, and those kids will grow up, and more gaming will just become normal, right? It'll just become the default, and I have no doubt of that. Like, honestly, in a way, that whole thing, the whole anger we see around the gaming community right now, maybe it's good news. Maybe it means they're at their last breath, right? And maybe it means that they know that this is over and that gaming is for everybody. And there's genuine discussions to be had. Like, right? I don't want to like dismiss all outrage as like angry gamers, because there's very serious discussion we need to have. The discussion around Sekiro right now and difficulty is a very important, serious discussion we might have that people are passionate about, because people are passionate about games. But I think what we're seeing is an increased understanding that passion and being an asshole are two different things. People love games and they express it through amazing cosplay. That's passion, right? People love games, so they yell at the developer because they changed the weapon. That's being an asshole. It's that simple. You love a thing or you disagree with it, just tell the developer. Just be like, if 1,000 people say like, yo, I don't really like what you did with this weapon, then the developers will go like, oh, hey, look, 1,000 people are telling us that. If 1,000 people go like, I will murder your family if you don't change this weapon back. What? No. Like, yeah, we'll see it for sure, but we also see the other thing. It's not like we don't see it, right? Developers are like, we're like borderline obsessive. Like, we care about what we make, right? Like, we have to do better at that as well, but we care about what we make. We read every comment. Like, we see every video. Like, we do. And every bad review hurts, right? Every bad thing we read about our game hurts, because this is our baby for like 2-3 years. So people go like, oh, developers don't care. There's not a single developer in the world that doesn't care. If the developer doesn't care, they'll work for IBM. If you're a programmer, you'll work for like a bank or something, make 3 times the money, have job security. It's great. We need to work on that too, by the way. If you're an artist, like work for an architect firm. Musician, work for movies. Like there's a million jobs that are better paying than games industry. The only reason anybody's ever in the games industry is because they care. There's no other reason. This would be a bad idea. So we really need to fix that.
Okay, this is great. I could go on asking questions the whole afternoon, but I have to go.
Yeah.
So one last question I'll give to everybody. What is the last great game you played and why is it great? It could be an old game, a new game, whatever you want.
Can I do 2?
Sorry?
Can I do 2?
Sure.
All right. So, indie games, Baba Is You. Small little puzzle game. It's very clever. It has very Stanley Parable-esque feel to it. It's a game about the rules of games. You play a little fluffy dog character, kinda, named Baba, and it's like one of those tile pushing games. So you push these tiles around, but some of the tiles are words, and those words are actually the rule of the level. So you will see Baba is you, wall is stop, right? Which means that Baba is the character you control, and the walls will stop you from going through. But if you push the word stop away from wall, then it just says wall is, and now walls don't stop you anymore, right? You can play with that in fascinating ways, and there's hundreds of very clever levels. I honestly find
very hard levels after a while.
I find the start of the game the most interesting, but because it's very creative, it's very freeform. Later on in the game, it becomes a little bit more prescriptive, and it's more of a puzzle game, right? So the start is more of a sandbox game, and the end is more of a puzzle game. No matter which of the two you like, there's something fun to be had in the game. It's very layered. It's very clever.
It's nice to ask this to a developer.
Yeah.
Would you agree that it's not that much about language and it's more about kind of programming language?
Yeah, it's a programming language. Yeah, it's more of a. I mean, it's a game about rules, right? It's not per se about language. It's about this does that.
Yeah.
And this does that, and that is very much. It's a programming structure, right? But it's a very specific expression of code, which is rules. Which means there's incredible stuff you can do. Like you can do wall is Baba and Baba is you, and then suddenly all the walls in the level become you, and now you control 100 of you at the same time, and it's great, right? It's super silly, but there's a definite joy in playing with those blocks to find solutions that aren't the intended one, right? In that regard, it feels a lot like the Zachtronics games, which are some of my favorite puzzling games as well. The other game, and is a game I've tweeted about a lot, is Ace Combat 7.
Okay.
I'm very much enjoying Sekiro, but I'm not done with it, so I'm not at the point where I can like have a full opinion on it. But for Ace Combat 7, what I can say is it is an arcade flight combat game where you control airplanes mixed with the melodramatic, over-the-top politics and a philosophy of a Final Fantasy game. So you're just like flying your airplane and doing loopings and like shooting oil rigs, and then some guy in the background is just like, what is a nation? And it's like, what, mate? I'm shooting this. Can we have this conversation in like 15 minutes when I've landed? And it's just great. They're very sincere about the whole like story. It's like very cinematic, and like it hits that very good balance of like, it's a little bit janky. It's a little bit like you play it and you're like, is this good? And then you're like, no, this is good. This is very good. I like this. It's like Earth Defense Force.
Okay.
It has that like that je ne sais quoi. You know, that like I don't know why this is good, but I just played it with a big grin on my face for the entire game. There's some moments in the game that are like incredible narrative moments, and the majority of it's just like what. There's like one scene where they give the full name of the bad guy, and it's like 27 names, and you're just listening to it for like 30 seconds. You're like, what? Why is this happening? What am I watching? It's so good. It makes me so happy. It's honestly, I have a very big soft spot for games like that, because at least they're trying something different, right? They're trying something silly or weird or like kind of like what is happening, and it's this very like fighter pilots are the best humans. like that kind of story. You're like, what? Okay, yeah, fair. Let's strap in. Let's go. I loved it. Okay. Yeah, huge fan. I'm Beat Saber, but that's cheap.
No.
Beat Saber's great.
Okay, well, thank you.
Cheers.
From playing your games, it's pretty clear that you grew up watching a lot of movies and TV shows from the US. But I guess I'm more curious about the games you used to play when you were a kid. If you were passionate for some specific genre, some specific title.
So you're right about the movies and TV. When he was very small, he had a PC in both houses, so he started out actually playing games where it's just like a bunch of dots on the screen. So after that, various games started coming out in Japan. By the time Mario Brothers was in the arcades in Japan, the original Mario Brothers, he was in elementary school at the time. And in Japan, cram school is very common for kids that go to extra school after school to study extra. And he would skip cram school, make it seem like he was going to cram school, and actually go to the arcades and play Mario and stuff.
Okay. Well, I used to not eat at school to keep the money for buying game for the Sega Master System.
Same kind of kid then.
Yeah. And then I read that you studied movies at university. And how did you switch to video games? Did your study push you in that way, or was it something else?
So yes, he took film courses in university and studied film. But at the time, the Japanese film industry was much more exclusive than it is now. And it basically was a system where if a teacher liked a script you wrote, he'd say, okay, you can come work for me for 15 years, then I'll make you into a film director. And he heard that and just thought it was ridiculous. So he said, okay, that's out. He also took some other classes. He took a computer graphics class and a commercial advertising class. He didn't really like the commercial advertising, but he did do well in computer graphics. And so he thought, well, what's the job where I can utilize this? And he found the game industry.
Okay. And then you got into SNK and worked on the last Blade game. Yep. And that was probably the high point for SNK. They were at the top of the game with arcades and the fighting games. And what was it like to start with such a huge company at the time and be there?
So yeah, working with a big team in a big company was a very important experience for him, because up to that point in university, he just would work on 1 to 3 friends on a project. But now, all of a sudden, he was working with all these different people on teams of 20 to 30 people. That was a very important experience for him. Also, at the time, SNK owned arcades, and they would do location tests of their games, where they would actually put a new game in the arcade, and they would go there to watch people, watch the reactions. And that taught him the importance of test playing.
Okay. And I remember in the PlayStation 2 era, I was working on the PlayStation magazine, and from my point of view, games like Extermination or Spy Hunter, they were like the underdogs. They were good games, but they were not, I don't know, Resident Evil or Metal Gear Solid. And I'm curious if you felt this, being the underdogs and trying to challenge the top shooter in the Japanese industry.
Okay. You mean Spy Fiction, right?
What did I say? Spy Hunter. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Spy Fiction.
Spy Fiction? Okay.
Yeah. Spy Fiction, not Spy Hunter. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
He wants you to tell him why people think that they're a thing below.
Yeah.
Well, at least, like, for example, I think about Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid, they were series already existing. They already had a history and people were expecting them, while Spy Fiction and Extermination, they were new games, so they had the challenge to let people know they were good and they were deserving the same kind of attention. But I don't know, if he didn't feel like he was the underdog, it's fine.
So yeah, at the time he really had no conscious feeling that he was the underdog. He was just making what he wanted to. Sure. But then gradually he realized, oh, I'm making games that like the normal person isn't necessarily going to play. But he realized that that's him, that's who he is, and that's what he's good at. So he decided to own it.
Yeah, and then you made the weirdest game ever with Deadly Premonition, and that worked. So I guess that was the right choice to go on your bizarre way.
Even when he was working on it, it was so much fun because he realized there's nothing that exists in the world that's this weird. So he really liked working on it.
And he was aware that it was this weird, but did you expect people to embrace it this much?
he knew that he would buy it, so that's all he cared about. So he liked working on it. But his staff members did not enjoy working on it. That was really hard for him.
Oh, okay. And I wasn't able to watch the panel on the Japanese industry that was a bit ago, but I was thinking that in those years when he made Extermination and Spy Fiction from Japan, a lot of huge games were coming, and then there was this flexion, and for a few years maybe it was less strong, the Japanese industry, and now it's come back with a lot of great games, and I'm wondering, why do you think there's this, is it just cyclical, or are there reasons for this? It's going up and down from the...
Right, so previously in Japan, making your own in-house engine that can do a very unique thing that other people can't do, and then hiding that technology and using it for yourself to get the advantage. That was the most important thing for developers. But then more and more Westerners caught on to that technology. They started developing it themselves, and they sort of lots more skilled people came out into the game industry. They started making their own game engines. And especially when it comes to Western art teams, they have a lot of artists in their art teams. And Japan couldn't keep up with that. So hiding their own technology didn't really work anymore. It wasn't really putting them in the forefront. So they decided, okay, we have to go with the rest of the world. We have to become open and use, the engines that everyone else is using and sort of ride the wave. So 5 years ago, in the Japanese game industry, Japanese developers really started to study new technology and new methods. And that hard work is finally paying off on things now.
Okay. And one thing that we've seen in recent Japanese big games is an approach to open world, which has been very strong in Western games for a few years, and now it's coming strong also from Japan. But it's fascinating because to me at least, it feels like they're doing open world, but they're still in some way managed to have a very Japanese way to level design inside that open world.
Yeah, especially with Metal Gear Solid 5, Breath of the Wild, and Monster Hunter, you can really tell that the stage designs, each separate stage is that really refined Japanese design. They're just like lining them all up and making the worlds more wide and massive.
Yeah. Well, going back on his game specifically, one thing that at least I feel from them is that he tries to mix Western taste, maybe stuff from the US, European taste, there's Japanese, and I wonder if this is a conscious try or if it's just something that comes organically from him, from his creativity, his passions.
So he doesn't really, he isn't really conscious of doing that. It's just that it all depends on the setting of the game. Wherever he decides to set the game, he's going to research that place until he can make it his own. And why does he always choose overseas places for the settings? That probably comes down to the fact that when he was a child, while other Japanese kids were watching stuff like Gundam, he was busy watching 007, 18, Knight Rider.
Okay. With D4, you experimented with Kinect and the episodic structure. I'm guessing, is there something from that experience that you would like to try again, or that you would keep with you, or maybe would you like to try VR?
So, as far as the episodic thing goes, he feels like because D4 wasn't able to continue, he ended up really disappointing the users indirectly. So as far as ever doing something episodic again, he's going to have to watch how the industry goes. If there ever becomes a thing like Netflix for games where it's a sort of a package where he knows that he'll be able to make 10 episodes or something like that, he'll think about it. As far as VR goes, he loves new technology. So at White Owls, they're always challenging themselves with new technology. And if anything they sort of experiment with seems like it could become a product, they'll work on taking it to the market. But as far as publishers go, no one's investing in VR because they're just focused on software makers.
Okay. And regarding White Owls, the new studio, I'd like to know what was the most important motivation to go indie, I guess. And also, tomorrow you have a talk when you will explain why The Missing was your first game with White Owls. And I won't be able to be there, so can you condense an hour talk in 2 minutes?
So the biggest motivation behind White Owls was to escape from the system of salarymen just making games as a business, and to really make something creative to give the users a quality experience.
Okay.
So the missing there are several things he wanted to do. The first thing was he wanted to get rid of the common belief that Swery is a story-only developer. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And the second thing is, he feels like when people play games, they're not going to really care about someone who experiences something that they can't sympathize with. So he wanted to really work in he added the story afterwards to the game in the first place, but he really wanted to add a message that people could really sort of get some specific sort of feeling from. And it was also a message about White Owls itself, to let everyone at White Owls feel that it was okay for them to accept themselves the way they are, to accept their identity.
Well, and that's a great message, and I think it's pretty relevant today to say those things and to say them in a space like the game space, which is great, but there's also a lot of people who probably don't agree with that. People screaming on the internet, that kind of.
It's not only, the message isn't constrained to gender only. In the game industry especially, there's a lot of salarymen who anything that's different from themselves they think is bad. So he really wanted to send out a message that White Owls is unique and we're okay with being unique.
Okay. And regarding the conception of him as a story-only developer, basically, if you address that, is that an admission of guilt for your previous game? That for some reason, maybe not on purpose, but you kind of work too much on other thing and not enough on gameplay?
The real reason is because he has a new studio now, so we thought it was a great opportunity just to show people a new story.
Okay. What is the last great game you played and why is it great?
So the answer is My Child Levin's Born last year. He was really moved by how they expressed war without ever making people shoot the gun.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
May I ask you how your passion, your interest for video games and technology started? What was the thing that sparked the love for it?
That's a really deep question. But yeah, I was not the special, the personality in my childhood. This is just ordinary kid. And I played video games, and I watched the music videos. I listened to music, and I watched the movies. But I wanted to create something. That was my, one of my dream, and life. It's kind of a direction in my life, and. The movies are great as the narrative media, but they have the limitation, and format.
Sure.
Yeah, this is a square 2D screen, sound, visual, but kind of a 2 hours drama. And also the music videos, the many music videos coming, and the many music video director exists. But this is also, it's getting the format. And so I wanted to create much more free situation. So the game was very low res, and that was a poor technology at the time when I was a kid. But it's free, we can, this is the experiential media, and this is no describe, no words, no borders, and everybody can play, everybody can feel fun. So that was the most amazing thing, to me. Wow, this is the new form, interactive. And when I was young kid, I played, the Breakout, the Pong, those black and white, and the beep sounds. but I was amazed. Wow, what is this? It's fun. I could play long hours. So yeah, I never forget about that, and I want to create a new thing in the future. That means the game. I think the most fun thing in the game industry, technology all the time, changing and changing and changing, and inventing. So, and I could foresee that kind of future. So I decided to go into the game industry. Yeah.
And I read that you majored in literature, majored at the university. You studied literature. And which probably, especially back at the time, wasn't the usual background for people working in video game, maybe more on the technical side. Do you think that influenced a lot the way you approached design and production, the fact that you came from that background and you were maybe different in that way?
I think I was maybe lucky. Because I could study about the media aesthetics. It's a very essential theme. So including in technology and including in philosophy and art, entertainment, any element, media design. So, and that was a really good time to think deeper and deeper. So what are the mechanism and the essence of the human being, why people loves the music, why people loves the move, emotional move, why, and what are the active, interactive, the media, what are the passive media, what kind of strengths, what kind of weakness. The movie is a very strong narrative media, but not interactive. So, and the game, interactive, this is free, this is experiential, new media, but the resolution is low. And nobody cried with the game at the time.
Yeah.
Now it's changed, but at the time, nobody cried with the game. So, but that kind of comparison, and so I could find many things. Just right before I create something, and also including the technology. I'm talking about the media aesthetics. So including the technology, so I could foresee and project the future. What kind of technology can change our life in the future, and the sensitivity, emotion as art and entertainment.
You felt limited by the technology at the time. You wanted more.
Yeah, at the time, yes. But if we could have the new technology, maybe we can create new experience.
Yeah, sure.
So I felt this is like a blue ocean. So I decided, okay, let's go to the gaming industry. That was 1990. Yeah. But that was still 2D era.
I remember at your classic postmortem at GDC for Red, you showed Xenon 2, the game with the music.
Xenon? Yeah.
And that surprised me. Was that kind of games, and it was on Amiga? Was it popular in Japan, Amiga? Because it was very popular in Italy.
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so
very less people play.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you were into that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I loved that. So it was really, oh wow, when you showed it. You started working on racing games. and you worked on the arcade cabinets, already working with the technology and the feeling with the body and everything, and then you did the trans vibrator, you worked with, now you Kinect, VR, suits, all this stuff. Now that you got to VR, is that like just the arriving point and you just have to perfect VR, or do you see something even more crazy coming out that you will use to make us feel strange things? I don't know, is VR the end of this journey, I guess?
No, VR is just beginning. Yeah, this is just kind of the milestone, I think. So I'm watching the future. I can say XR.
What is XR?
XR is kind of an extended reality.
Okay.
Including VR, augmented reality AR, and mixed reality MR. So they're using XR recently, so including all the virtual, augmented, and mixed reality technology.
Okay.
So that means, I think that we're going to the experiential era, much more. So the VR, you can see all 3D and very immersive, but it's too isolated. Yeah, this is a program. But mixed reality, have you tried the Magic Leap?
No, I haven't.
So the HoloLens?
Yeah.
Magic Leap, it's a HoloLens, like a mixed reality type, the experience synthesizing the tangible thing and the intangible, the virtual world, the mix. So this is totally new reality, So we made the Resident Infinite and Tetris Effect in VR, but so if you could play together like this and playing one game together, it must be much more fun.
Yeah.
And just remembered, when I was a kid, okay, let's go to a friend's house, and everybody, brought the game, cassette, and play together, and whoa, like that. That was so fun.
Yeah.
I need that.
Yeah.
In the future.
So you don't like the idea of everybody playing VR, isolating themselves, and getting to this dystopic future where we don't talk to each other? That's too much.
Yeah. Not only avatar. We can have the real communication and the melting everything and the vision, one vision. Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, talking about VR, you mentioned Red, and it came out on Dreamcast, and it was great. And then you remade it in HD, and then you remade it in VR. I guess I have two questions on it. One is the VR version the final version, or do you think you can do even better than that with Res? And apart from that, you did something really hard, because when people go back to what they did and they try to make it better, a lot of time they mess up. You actually made it better twice. Did you think about this? Were you nervous about going back to Res?
No, nervous, not at all. Just fun.
Okay.
It's fun. When I was to produce the first Res, in my mind, the Res was kind of Area X type of, the freedom. You can play and you can fly and you can move anywhere, and everything is three dimensional. And but that was impossible to make that at the time. So the technology can make it real. To make it means imagination and ideas. So it's getting closer to the pure original imagination and idea. So that means, the no frustration, the purely that's fun to realize. So, but, I'm not a genius, I have some inspiration, but I have no confidence, we can make this, not like that first. So, and I need to have the test, and I need to prove this is good or not. So, but it's a really happy thing. My inspiration is very close to VR kind of experience originally. So that means not 2D brain. I think it's 3D brain. I think.
You just were able with Area X to do what you wanted to do in the beginning.
Yeah.
So you just got to where you wanted. It just took a long time. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And you worked with Kinect, with Child of Eden, which, by the way, I loved. It was amazing. And one thing that Kinect had, it had limits because it wasn't very precise at times, but there were no barriers. It was just you playing with the game, which is something that probably we still don't have with VR, because you still have to put this huge thing on your head, you still use the controllers. Do you think we'll get there to, I don't know, headsets that are like this pair of glasses and not having to hold controllers in your hand and just being there? You think that's possible? I don't know, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
Yeah, I think it's possible.
That's where we're going?
Yeah.
And that's probably what we need to make it really mainstream.
Yes. And I think the next 10 years and the 20 years, many technologies will be integrated. So we will have the next technology of Kinect. So what is the next version of the Kinect? I don't know yet. But we need that kind of a new technology in XR future. And anything goes, I think. Some people want to play with the controller. Yes, you can use it. And without controller, yes, you can. And I think going to the XR, mixed reality, and people can communicate and play each other, and they're using any devices, and maybe haptic.
Your suit.
Maybe, or the jackets.
Yeah, sure. Maybe something just on your arm or something.
Or small devices.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Tetris. You clearly like Tetris a lot. You made all those luminous things, and then you made Tetris. Do you remember the first time you played with Tetris?
Yes.
And what version was it?
That was arcade.
Oh, arcade. Okay.
Yeah.
And why did you like it? The first thing.
That was very powerful. Simple but powerful. The simple means very minimal, simple game mechanism and almost complete. Nothing, need to add, nothing, anything. So, and a purely well completed game.
Yeah. And maybe that's the fact that it's so pure and simple is the reason why it's so immortal, and everybody likes it. Everybody start playing and can't stop.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And that's also what makes it so versatile, because just in the last few months there have been Tetris Effect and Tetris 99, and they're the same game, but they are so different. The rhythm, the feeling, they're two completely different games. So how did you conceptualize Tetris Effect? Where does it come from? What was the thought process?
So I had a conversation, a long friendship with the chairman of Tetris company,
Okay.
Hank Rogers. So we have been a long conversation about, he mentioned about the Tetris itself, and he explained to me, Tetris has the power and mechanism. The player can feel the zone and the flow states when you concentrate to the game. It's getting faster, nothing, just feel. And this is like a runner's high kind of feel and effects. And that was really attractive, to me. How can I amplify and enhance that kind of experience with the new technology? VR, PS4, high def, high res, and our engine called synesthesia engine, the bunch of particles moving with sound of the music. So it's getting, bring to you the music and the visual and the gameplay kind of melting. This is a synesthesia, as we mentioned about that. And so that kind of the many flashes and inspirations. Or maybe we can create a new thing. Even if the Tetris, this is a complete game, but we can create new experience. So anyway, let's prove that.
Okay. And now that I've seen the Mizuguchi version of Tetris, I want to see the Mizuguchi version of everything. Like, I want you to go back to your roots and do a driving game with your aesthetics now, your synesthesia ideas, or maybe you can do, I don't know, a bullet hell, or even classical games like chess. Your version of chess. It's like a skin. I want you to apply to everything.
But the life is short, man.
Yeah, I know. But you have to do more games. You don't make them enough.
Yeah. But thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. And
well, anyway, apart from my desire, you, at least in my opinion, in your games, you're really good at communicating feelings, emotion, themes, without using words. It's just the music, the experience, and everything. But I wonder if you ever you see all these other games that have strong narrative component and a lot of text or voices, and do you ever wonder about going more into that, into doing a game with a clear story or with, I don't know, people talking, this kind of stuff? Is that something that interests you?
Yeah, that's a good point. But I don't know yet.
Okay.
But I think the boundaries, as you said, as you mentioned, between the game and the movie cinema, or the music and the game, and active, passive, first-person view and the third-person view, subjective, objective. But that kind of boundaries, is getting the melt in the future. So that means I think technology can realize that, make it real.
Okay.
So that means we have the new tech, XR technology in the future. We can enjoy my play and your play too, and we can communicate each other in the same time, and maybe using the new technology like the future Kinect, future sensors. So maybe this is getting the new form, right? So the new form, including there's some elements, existed in the past. We called that is a movie. That was a movie, or that was the game. But now let's get in a new form.
Okay. We have to wait and see what comes out.
Yeah, we have the best word, but maybe the movie people call that, oh, this is a experiential movie. The game people, oh, this is a very cinematic, new type of emotional, interactive game.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
We have to see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay. You've gone independent for how many years now?
5 years.
5 years. Okay. So now you can look back and see how it's been. I'm sure it was the right choice, but do you see maybe, I don't know, looking back, how good is it to be independent? Why is it good to be independent? And maybe do you see now some negative effect of having gone independent?
I have no negative point yet. It's very healthy. I got very healthy. So, I have no stress, but crazy busy. But it's a really good thing, So we have a vision and ideas, and that we want to make this, we want to do this, but no stress. We have to apply to some the clients. We have no clients. We have ideas, and we have we can get the money and the budget and the fund, and
so it's positive. You have freedom.
Yeah, so it's freedom.
Okay.
Freedom, total freedom.
Okay.
I really enjoy that kind of situation.
Well, that's why you go independent. One last final question I give to everybody.
Yeah.
If you can tell me what's the last great game you played, and why do you think that game is great?
I have no that.
No?
Yeah, I have no.
Well, it's okay.
Yeah. So recently I don't play games.
Okay.
So because I can't have the new fresh inspiration from the other people's game. So, but I need the inspiration. So I want to use my time to get new fresh ideas and inspiration. So yeah, that is the.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess could you explain what your role is in Kickstarter?
At Kickstarter?
You reaching out with developers. What exactly do you do?
Yeah, so my title is a title, but my title is Senior Games Outreach. So my job is to look for creators who are interested in running Kickstarter projects. I'm happy to help them through the beginning of the project all the way to the end of the project. It's really in any state. Like we like to say, as soon as you are thinking that you want to run a Kickstarter project, that's when you want to come talk to us. So it's a lot of strategy, it's a lot of answering questions, not only just from the terms of running the Kickstarter project, but also how are my reward structures? I'm maybe having a problem with getting my bank account information set up. It runs the gamut of different questions.
Has this been in place since the beginning with Kickstarter, or is it more recent development?
It's a little difficult to answer just because Kickstarter, this is our 10-year birthday. The outreach roles, I think, there's been various iterations of them. But for games specifically, there has been one person that's been consistent on the outreach position there. He's been there almost 7 years. It'll be 7 years this year. And then I was brought on to focus more on video games, although that has also shifted about 3.5 years ago.
Okay. Because you do hear stories about developers, maybe young developers, new guys that have trouble managing stuff.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most difficult thing for people, maybe their first experience with crowdfunding or development?
Yeah, I think for crowdfunding, a lot of it is setting realistic expectations is definitely part of the job.
And the communication with the community, I guess, is also important, because people maybe think of Kickstarter, maybe less now than at the beginning, but they thought of it as, okay, it's just a way to do a pre-order, but it's not that. I'm supporting them.
Right.
The project could go wrong.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff.
Well, there is an element of truth to, like, we're doing a pre-order, but I think even that is like a little bit disingenuous. I think more importantly, it's about building a community than anything else. And so you can look at it from the perspective of, well, I'm only running this Kickstarter to build a community, which is fine, but think about it also in terms of, like, I'm building a community to make this thing come to life that I want to have happen, right? So, like, this is my dream game that I want to make, and you're all a part of it with me, is a much more compelling story than, like, well, I'm just building a community so I can have people support me.
And you're here to find developers that want to join Kickstarter?
Yeah, I mean, we are always interested in meeting new people. My sort of objective here is to have face-to-face time with communities that I'm not normally able to, right? Like, we're based in the US, Kickstarter is based in New York City. So sort of reaching the Croatian market and just sort of the Eastern European market a little bit more with, you know, not everybody's able to go to GDC or PAX or a lot of the US-based conferences. So having that face-to-face time is, like, it's really important, and it's kind of special to have 3 days to really kind of, like, connect with people that we aren't normally able to, which is really nice. Yeah. So I'm looking for people that want to run Kickstarter projects, and also just sort of solidifies, like, Kickstarter is here to support you. Like, we believe in these communities that aren't necessarily served in other spaces.
So the idea is also, maybe there's people who don't know they should go on Kickstarter.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of people don't know that there are people behind Kickstarter, especially in the games category, right? Like, we're here, we want to talk to you. It's always interesting to me, like, we do a fair number of talks out in the world, and we always put our contact information, and people are so scared to contact us, and so it's a lot of me saying, like, no, please email me, I want to talk to you.
And of course I don't have access to the stats you have,
Right.
but from an outside perspective, it looks like the Kickstarter for video games has been like the thing for a few years, because a lot of high-profile names came to it, had a lot of success, and it kind of looks like it faded out a bit. There's still a lot of projects, but the bigger names are not going. Maybe the last one was Shenmue 3, the last very big one, or Thimbleweed Park, maybe. Is it fair to say so? And if it is it like a process you expected with this big boost and then going back to?
Well, so I think it kind of depends on what you mean by big name, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit subjective. In terms of,
I guess names that make a lot of buzz on the press and.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think those projects were very successful in 2014 and 2015. The thing to keep in mind is a lot of those projects are still coming out. But the other side of it is, like, for every, you know, quote, big name that comes to Kickstarter, there's like 5 to 7 like smaller games that do end up becoming, like, pretty successful. Toe Jam and Earl, for example. I mean, Greg Johnson is pretty well known, but Toe Jam and Earl as a property is much more well known. And that's just released to, like, critical success.
Yeah.
But then you also have things like Pinstripe, that now they are actually making a movie about Pinstripe, and that wouldn't be possible without Kickstarter, which is really exciting. Thomas Brush has been really incredible and instrumental within sort of a very small indie circuit. You have Hyperlight Drifter from Heart Machine, which they just announced another title that they're doing, I believe, with Annapurna, but that sort of, like, momentum for them was because of Kickstarter. Wonder Song by Greg Lobanov, which founded in 2016, right? So that was a Kickstarter project. That's critical success, right? Within sort of the community, which is fantastic. He's been nominated for multiple IGF awards. You know, his star is rising. So it's always a complicated situation where it's like, it's cool to have the big names come, but to me it's cooler when we're able to see people, like, just at the beginning of their career really rise as they kind of do that on Kickstarter. That's much more, like, empowering, I think.
And you mentioned the fact that they make movies about developments. There was the documentary from Double Fine also.
Oh yeah.
And
there's also the indie game movie too.
Indie game movie. How important is that to make people aware of how it works, that you are financing a game, so you should expect delays or things changing?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think that's, like, indicative
one thing, maybe people are not necessarily aware of how game development works, so
yeah.
they don't know that they should expect that from.
I mean, I think the reality is like, and forgive me for saying this, but like, it's not sexy. Like, it's not cool. It's not exciting, right? Like, game development is hard. It's a lot of work, and I think people have this idea, right? Like, so I used to work for Nickelodeon, and the number one job that these kids wanted was game designer, and I think they have it in their mind that they just sit around and design games all day, but like, that's only one piece of the puzzle. If you look at any other form of like entertainment or art, right? Like, if you're an artist, half of your time is spent creating, and the other half is dealing with business stuff, right? So you're commissioned to do pieces, but how do you get those commissions to happen, right? Like, that's the thing that doesn't get talked about. If you're a musician, you spend a lot of time practicing. You're not just like out there touring and playing in band, like playing shows and things like that. If you're in movies, like, you have to find financing for your film. Like, that's the non-fun part. So I think with games, it's kind of the same idea, where it's like, well, the game development part, like the actual creation of the game and the design and the art and that process is super fun and interesting. But the other 50%, where it's like there's a delay because of, you know, our laptop broke, or our computer broke, or our computer was stolen, or, you know, there's internal conflict within the team and stuff like that. That's not a fun thing to kind of show. So it's never exciting for people to kind of see that, right? Kickstarter delays, I think the challenge there is because people put their money up front. I think that's why there's a bit more of a backlash when there are delays, which I completely understand. But it is still indicative of the games industry as a whole. Untitled Goose Game just delayed again, so they're going to be coming out at the end of this year. So it's these things are extremely common.
But at the same time, you have the involvement from the community.
Yeah.
There's the positive side. They can interact with the developers, ask for stuff, suggestions.
I mean, I think that's one of the downsides of community in general, and it's like we live in this extremely strange time with Twitter and Facebook and Discord and, you know, constant access to people, where I think sometimes people forget that, like, the people behind the screen of when you are a fan of someone, they're also a person, right? Like, humans are very complex individuals, so it can be a little bit jarring when you're like, you know, hearing all of this feedback where out of 100 comments, 90% will be positive, but that 10% where it's people screaming at you on the internet, that 10% is always the loudest. So it's easy to focus on the negative when you have all of these other positive things happen. And so it is also a bit of the responsibility of the community to also kind of police the community a little bit more too, and say like, hey, that's not okay what you're doing, and that happens. But it's I don't think anybody's really figured out the right way to deal with it yet, because it's new, right?
Okay. Well, last question. What is the last great game you played, and why is it great?
So I'm playing Dragon Age Origins right now, and I really enjoy it. I've never really been into RPGs, and so I feel like this is a good sort of introduction for me, and I'm really excited to play more. Shamefully, I tried to play Assassin's Creed 2, and I just couldn't get into it. And I found myself getting really frustrated because I feel like there's a whole world out there of, you know, people love Assassin's Creed, and Assassin's Creed 2 in particular. And I was just like, this is not for me. This is not my thing.
I have the same issue, so you're not alone.
And that's okay. Like, it's totally okay. I play board games too. I play Dungeons and Dragons. I played a game, actually, Games of Berlin, with Luke, who's the other half of the well, there's four of us, but he and I are sort of the core, like, outreach people at Kickstarter. It's called Tomato, something like that.
Okay.
But it's a small card game by this team called E10 out of Japan, and they make like small board games, and their games are, at its core, they're very simplistic, but there's a lot of complexity to them. And so I think, I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe that to in Japanese is door, and motto is mask. And so essentially you have multiple cards, so one card will say to, one card will say motto, and then there's an actual tomato. So you line the cards up based on when you roll a die, so you have like 3 cards, and you have to read out everything as quickly as possible. So it could be like tomato. Yeah,
Okay.
But there's, you know, the complexity comes in because then you have one card where you have to reverse the order, and if you mess up within the, you know, the line of saying tomato, etc., everyone else playing has to take tomatoes, so you collect tomatoes that are part of the cards. I'm doing a terrible job explaining it.
It's okay.
Very
it's
fun.
fine.
Yeah.
No,
you made it really interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like really small, complex board games like that. Card games. Yeah, those are really fun for me.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.